So you've embarked on a new journey. You've found this amazing hobby revolving around making hundreds, thousands, or even millions of lights blink. So you're ready to dive deep into this rabbit hole and get started. So you decide to start programming your show. You go online, you crack your knuckles, you place them on the keyboard. But then you have no idea where to start. Hey everyone, thanks for watching How To Pixel, and in today's video, we're going to go over how to fully use xLights to program your light show. Everything from programming your own sequence with your own layout, all the way over to how to set up controllers to be able to read that program you made in xLights. xLights is a very easy to use, totally free, feature-packed sequencer. It's probably the most popular and most used software to program a light show in this hobby. xLights allows you to import a picture of your house and map out what props you want to go where. It then can even give you a real-time rendering of what your house will look like as you're programming it. You don't need any controllers, any lights, or even any idea of how you want your display to look to start programming in xLights. Even if your plans change and you don't use any of the props you've mapped out, you can still easily go and redesign your layout without losing the progress and programming you've done with all of your other props. Even though xLights is very easy to use, there is still a few basic things you should know about pixels or whatever type of lights you're going to be using before watching this video. So if you're brand new to all of this, I highly recommend you check out this beginner's RGB pixels video so you can get a basic understanding of how mostly everything works. Now before we move on, I'm going to be going over some basic terminology I'll be using in this video for anyone who's new to this. So if you're familiar with basic xLights terminology, you can skip to this part in the video, but if you don't know anything about xLights, then I recommend you stay for this part. First off, sequence. The file or program that holds all of the data for the animation or song that you programmed. Each different program you make within xLights is considered a sequence. Sequencer. The software that is being used to make a sequence. For example, xLights is called a sequencer because you use it to make sequences. Prop. An item or an element within your display. For example, a wreath is a prop, a candy cane is a prop, a window outline is a prop. Any item in your light show is considered a prop. Show folder or show directory. The folder on your computer where all of your xLights files are stored. Node. A single controllable light or element within your display. For example, each one of these pixels is considered a node because each one of these is a controllable item. However, if this whole strand of pixels could only be one color, each individual pixel is not programmable, then this whole strand would be considered one node. A node is one thing that you can program individually in xLights. String, a single connection to your controller. For example, if you had 4 props in consecutive order, all going to one wire, going to one port on your controller, that would be considered one string because it's making one connection to your controller. And finally, strand, the number of times a wire zigzags or repeats itself within your prop. For example, this tree has 8 different sections, so this would have 8 strands. And that's it for basic xLights terminology. Now we can dive into the juicy part of this video, actually using xLights. Feel free at any time during this video to use the time codes in the scrub bar or in the description to skip to a certain part of the video you want to see. This video is going to be really long, but trust me, afterwards you'll be able to make your first basic sequence all on your own. Now without any more of a delay, let's get started. So before we could start sequencing or programming anything in xLights, we have to install xLights first. If you already have xLights installed, that's great and you can skip this step and go to this time in the video. However, if you don't have xLights, I'm going to show you how and where you can install it. So you're going to want to go to xlights.org, and I'll put this in the description below. And this brings you to the xLights website. This website has a ton of helpful tools and things to get you started if you're new to xLights. Tons of videos and resources, and tons of ways you can connect the experts that can help you with any problems you have. So when you get here, you're going to want to go to the download page. And this will show you all of the downloads for xLights. Now they do update xLights very frequently because they're trying to get out all of the bugs and add enhancements and just try and make it the best software for anyone to use. You don't have to update xLights every time a new update comes out. I'd just recommend updating it maybe every month or 2 months So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to click the latest update or any of the updates you want. I'm going to pick the latest, and you're going to click it, and then you can select where you want it to be saved on your computer and download it. I already have xLights downloaded, so I'm not going to do this. But once you download the .exe file, you can run it like you would a normal program and then boot up xLights. One thing I'd like to talk about before I go ahead and open xLights, when you install xLights, you'll notice that it comes with 3 different programs, and each of them do certain things, but the one called xLights 64, this is the one you will be using for programming, making your layout, and all of that. xScheduler, what that does is that is a software you can use to put all of your program files on and use your computer that this is running on to run your light show. And xScanner, what this does is it scans your local network for any controllers or any devices on your network, and it tells you what they are so you know what the IP addresses of your controllers are. So xScheduler and xScanner you don't need, but xLights, this is the main program you will be using for programming and setting up your layout. But now we can get into opening xLights. Now when you start xLights, you'll see something like this. It'll be loading up, and before xLights opens, it'll ask you to select your show folder. If you've already selected your show folder, then that's great, and you can get right into the tutorial, which is at this time. But if you haven't, I'll show you what that is. The show folder is basically the folder where all of your settings, your program files, everything for xLights is stored inside. This is mine right here. I call it BBL xLights. It stands for Bridgeport's Brightest Lights xLights. And in here, I have a ton of files from over the years of programming. I have sequences all the way back from 2021. I don't know where my older ones are. I have imported sequences. I have music. I have lyrics. I have images. I have exports. And just tons of other files in here. Now, when you're first starting out with xLights, you're probably not going to have this many files. So create a folder you want your xLights files to be stored in, and then just select that folder. I have this one right here called Demo xLights. It is empty, so I can get a fresh start and show you what that looks like. And then xLights will open, and it should look something like this. There's a lot of different buttons, a lot of different tabs, a lot of different settings, and they can be very confusing, but I'm going to try and explain it as simply as I can for anyone who is new to this. So the first tab we are on right here is the controllers tab. This is the tab where you can set up all of your controllers that you will be sending your xLights files to, or anything that will be running the show. This is where you can set them all up in xLights. The first thing I'd like to go over is the directories right here, the show directory. This is what we just set up, where your folder is stored for all of your xLights data. If you ever need to, you could change that folder permanently or temporarily. Changing it temporarily is if you wanted to import a sequence, for example, and there's a different folder that you downloaded you need to open it from first. Or if you're like me, for my Halloween light show, I have a separate folder. That way I could keep my Christmas and Halloween stuff separate. It makes sequencing a lot easier. So whenever I need to program my Halloween sequence, I will change it to my BBL xLights Halloween folder right here. And it's in this folder. I'll select it here. And then if you look at, I already have my layout set up. It's a little bit messed up, but I have my Halloween layout right here. I have all of my models on here and my controllers. If you're in a temporary folder, you could change it temporarily again. You could restore it to permanent, or you could change it permanently again. I'm going to restore it to the demo xLights file. Excuse me, the demo xLights folder. And now I'm going to talk about how you can add a controller onto xLights. So an amazing thing about xLights is you don't have to have any information about your controller. You don't have to have any of your layout planned. You could just set something up. This might not even be your permanent layout. You might just be thinking maybe it'll look like this, and you don't have to put in any controller information, and you can immediately get to sequencing. So if you're not sure which controller you're going to be using yet, or you don't have one or anything like that, you can get right into setting up your layout and sequencing. However, I would recommend that you still watch this part, because eventually you're probably going to want to set up a controller once you figure out which one you're going to be using. So there's 3 different types of controllers we can add here. We can add a USB, an Ethernet, and a null. The first one, a USB, this is typically for AC lights, controllers that use DMX or LOR or Renard. You probably wouldn't be using USB if you are using pixels in your light show, or you plan to. But if you're planning on using AC lights or regular Christmas lights, which xLights can program, then you'll probably add a USB controller. Now, most of your controllers, like Falcon controllers from Pixel Controller, cult boards, SAN devices, a bunch of other ones I'll show on the screen. These are going to be the Ethernet controllers. These are like, if you want to say, the regular controllers that you'd use for Pixels. So you can click Add Ethernet, and it'll add an Ethernet controller right here and give you some settings right here to set up for it. You can put in the name of the controller, whatever you want to name it. So I'll put in, let's say, main controller. And then you can add a description. So like, this is the main controller for the light show. And then you could select the vendor of the controller. So you don't have to do this, but if you know which controller you're going to be using, you could select the vendor. These are all of the different vendors right here that xLights supports. If you don't see the vendor on here, you just won't be able to get the fancy features that I'll go over in a second. But for this example, I'm going to be using, let's say, a Falcon controller. These are a really popular Pixel controller, and these are the brand of controllers I use in my light show. And then you could select the model. So Falcon has a bunch of different models. I'm going to go with the F16 V3 because that's the controller I have. Now, most controllers will allow you to add an expansion board to it. So if you have an expansion board and you know which one you're going to be using, you could select any of these. I'm going to select no expansion board right now. And then I'm going to select these two checkboxes right here, the full xLights control and the auto layout models. xLights has gotten amazing over the years of being able to set up almost all of your controllers right from within xLights. Back in the olden days, before this technology existed, you had to go and look at the channels and universes, and if this doesn't make any sense, don't worry, you don't need to know about any of this now. But you'd used to have to go in and put in and manually put in the channels and universes onto each of your controllers for each prop, and it was such a pain. But xLights has made it very easy nowadays, so you can go and drag the props onto the different ports that you'll be using, and I'll show that in a second. But if this doesn't make any sense, basically just know that xLights has made it amazingly easy to do all this, and it can't do that unless you give it access to. So select all three of these checkboxes. The auto size one will pop up too once you select the other checkbox. The next setting here is the default port brightness. So you can have xLights automatically tell your controller what brightness to have each of the pixel ports on. I'm going to set it to 30 because we use 30% brightness in our light show. And you could select if the controller is active, inactive, or xLights only. Basically, if you want this controller to be an xLights only, like you're just setting this up to program, or if you're actually going to be using it, then you want it to be active. Suppress duplicate frames. What this does is basically if xLights detects two multiple frames where it's the same thing, it will just not send the data to the controller for the same thing because it would trust that the controller will just use the data from the old frame. If that doesn't make sense, just leave it unchecked. You don't have to check that. The IP address and multicast right here. Basically, the IP address, this is where you can put in your IP address for the controller if you know what it's going to be. If you put this in, it will give xLights the ability to talk to the controller since it knows its address and where to locate it. If you know what your IP address is going to be, I recommend you put it in. But if you don't right now, like you don't have a controller, you could just select multicast. Quick editor note, since I didn't go over multicast. If that's checked, it will basically just search all over your network for your controller and it won't know the specific address to it. So if you can, putting in your IP address of the controller on your network is the better option. The protocol, this is basically what the type of data the controller accepts. A lot of controllers accept multiple types of data. I'm pretty sure Falcon boards can select E131 or can accept E131 and ArtNet. But the most standard Pixel controllers will use E131, so you can just leave that selected. The priority, what this does is if multiple computers are sending one controller data, it will be able to read both of them, but it won't be able to know which one to use for the data from because it's receiving both. It won't know which one to use. So if one is set to a higher priority, then it will pick that one over the other computer. You won't need to worry about this for most beginner shows because you'll only have one computer anyway, so just leave this at 100. These are some more IP address settings right here. You don't have to worry about them right now since we have multicast selected, but you could put in the IP address or the host name of the FPP. FPP stands for Falcon Pi Player. It's just the software that you could run on a really small computer called a Raspberry Pi, and you could use that to send the data out to your controller. For right now, don't worry about it. If you ever do set up FPP and you plan to use it, I do have some other videos going over how to set it up, and I do go over all the settings and xLights that you have to set up for it. Start universe. So I'm going to try to explain this as quickly and simply as possible, but a standard Pixel has a red, a green, and a blue LED inside of it. 3 different LEDs. And the Pixel could turn on different LEDs at certain intensities to make certain colors. So like you could turn on the red and blue LED to make purple, or turn them all on to make white. So since there's 3 different LEDs in each pixel, there's 3 channels of data that go to each pixel. 1 for the red, 1 for the green, and 1 for the blue. Each channel can have a different value set to it for how bright the pixel needs to be. So basically each pixel takes 3 channels of data. A universe is what holds the channels inside of it, and a universe can hold up to 512 channels. Now most people use 510 channels, and the reason for that is because this is divisible by 3, so one universe could hold 170 pixels in it. Now, if you were to use 512 channels, it would hold 170 .66666 pixels in it, basically. And the next universe would pick up that last channel that isn't included in here. Now, I just recommend leaving it at 510. It's just simpler and you don't have to worry about that. Now, let's say to make numbers easy, you have 1,700 pixels in your show. If each universe can hold 170 pixels, you're going to need a total of 10 universes, because 10 times 170 is 1,700. Now, if you enabled the full xLights control and all these other settings, xLights will deal with this for you and it will set it up for you. The only thing you have to tell it is the start universe. So if you have a controller before this one, let's say you have 2 controllers in your show, and that one, the first controller is already set up but this one isn't, and that one takes 10 universes. Then you're going to want this controller to start at the 11th universe. That way they aren't overlapping and it's its own separate universes. Now, if you have 1 controller in your show, just leave this at 1. You don't need to adjust this. Leave it at 1, and xLights will automatically determine how many universes you need and the channels and all of that for it if you select these full xLight control things. But that is all of the different settings on a controller in xLights. And now if you come down here, there are some different buttons on here. Some of them you cannot click because we did not set the IP address of the controller, so it cannot reach the controller. But the visualizer right here, this will open up all of the ports on the controller. So the F16 V3 has 16 ports on it when it's not expanded. And what this will allow you to do is your props and elements will show up here. So if you have like candy canes, a wreath, let's say like a line of lights, I don't know. It'll allow you to drag them onto the ports in the order that you want them to be connected to the controller to. So let's say you have like a line of 4 candy canes and then a wreath, and you want 2 of the candy canes and then the wreath and then the other 2 candy canes to be chained together in like that pattern. You could drag them onto the port in that order, but that's what this does. This makes it super easy to tell the controller which props you want on which ports. The upload input button, this will upload the input to the controller. It will basically tell the controller, hey, this is the input you're going to be looking for. You're going to be looking to receive 10 total universes because there's, let's say, 1,700 lights. You're going to be looking for 10 universes, and the channels, the amount of channels in each universe is going to be 510. Be on the lookout for this. This makes it so you don't have to set it up manually. And then the upload output, that will basically upload everything you set up in the visualizer. It'll tell the controller, hey, you're going to have 3 candy canes on port 15, and then you're going to have 2 wreaths on port 16, and then you're going to have, what else is there? A couple of arches on port 12, and it will set up all of the information on the controller for you. Now, some controllers, if you don't have them in the vendor list or xLights just can't, they won't be able to upload the output for you, and you will still have to do that manually. But most common controllers, xLights will be able to upload the output to for you. And then there's some other buttons here like open. You can click this and it will open the controller UI for you, the user interface, if the IP address is put in and the controller is online. So if I had my controller plugged in, let's say it was on IP address 192.168.1.200, and I put that into xLights, I could just click open and it will automatically open a Chrome tab for me, or Microsoft Edge, whatever your default browser is, and take me to the controller UI. And then the delete button, this will delete the controller. We don't want to do that because we want to save this controller for now. And just because I'm going to type in an IP address now, so if I do plug in my controller, I can access it. And the IP address of my controller is usually, I can't type. Then the final type of controller you can add over here is add a null controller. This is basically a controller you want to set up just because, but you never want to do anything with it. You don't want to send the data anywhere. Basically something you could just do to add your models to if you want to, but you won't ever be able to do anything with this controller. And then the final button on this list right here is the Discover button. This will look on your internet or on your network, your Wi-Fi, for any controllers, and it will put them on here for you. I don't have any controllers plugged in right now, so this wouldn't do anything. But if you had a controller plugged in and you don't know the IP address of it, you can hit Discover and it will search your network for it. And then once you're done adding your controller or controllers, depending on how many you have, you can hit save and it will save it. And that is the entire controllers tab. Now, before we move on to the next tab, the layout tab, I'm going to go over what all of these different buttons up here at the very top do. So let's get started with the file one. This one has some different buttons on here. It will allow you to create a new sequence. You can open a sequence, open a recent sequence. There are some test sequences I have in here that I was using earlier. If you had a sequence open, you could also click these other buttons like save the setup, save the sequence as a file, close the sequence. Preferences, I'm going to come back to this because there's a lot of different settings in here that I'm going to go over in just a few minutes. Sequence settings, you could also click this if you had a sequence open. This will allow you to go through and change any of the settings in the sequence. Keybinds, this basically tells you what keybinds do what feature, and then you could change some of them on here too, or add some. In my default xLights folder, I have a lot of these changed to how I like them, but you could just go through here and look at the different things they do. Export house preview video. What this will do is if you have a sequence open, you can click this and it will export a video of what that sequence will look like for you and put it into a MP4 file or some type of video file for you. And then you can share it or look at it or do whatever you want with it. I find this very useful because whenever I want to upload a video of the lights, what I've been working on, I don't have to just screen record it. I can click this and it'll export a video for me. Select show folder. This is the same button as change the show folder. It will allow you to change your show folder, and it could show you also the recent show folders, like I had my Halloween and the regular Christmas one open. Backup, if you click this, it will create a backup of all of your things in xLights, any sequences, any settings, any like saved effect presets, which I'll go over later in the video what those are. It will save any of that. You can restore a backup, so you can go back, like if you made a backup 2 days ago and you want to go back to that, you can restore that. Under the edit menu, there are some regular editing buttons. You have your undo. There would be a redo button here. If you clicked undo, you can cut, copy, paste. These usually only work when you have a sequence open. Shift effects. If you have a sequence open again, you can click this and it will allow you to shift all of the effects in the sequence by however many milliseconds you want. So you could type in like 100,000 milliseconds and that'd be 100 seconds. If you update your audio file, let's say, or like the audio moves 2 seconds for some reason, if you had to change it, you could click this and move all of your work for all the effects 2 seconds in that direction too. And then shift selected effects, you can select effects that you want to shift. So you could click this and it'll shift all of those like it does with shift effects, only the ones that you have selected. And then color replace, this will replace any certain color that you select with a different color for either every selected effect or every single effect in the sequence. So if I wanted every yellow color with my selected effects to switch to white, this is what I could do. I could click this and it'll open a little menu to do that with. Under tools, there are a lot of different things. I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm just going to go over the ones you would probably use. The test button, this will open this testing menu where you can connect it to your controller, and if you had any lights plugged in, or you have to have your universes and channels and all of that set up, but it will test the lights that you want it to. Check sequence, this will check your sequence for any problems. Some other ones you might use, the batch render. What this will do is it will allow you to select any sequences you want that you've made and render them all. FPP connect, this will allow you to connect to your Falcon player. If you are using one, it will also allow you to upload any sequences, any media, songs, videos, anything to that FPP, so you don't have to manually upload them. Bulk controller upload. This will upload all of the settings you have for your controllers to whatever controllers you select. This is useful if you have lots of controllers in your show. Now, a lot of these other different menus are for more advanced stuff, which you probably won't be using if this is your first time using xLights. So to save another 20 minutes from the video, I'll just skip to the last bottom few. These last 3 buttons down here, these open different apps that are included, like I showed when you install xLights. This opens xSchedule. And now, I'm going to be honest, my knowledge stops at xCapture. I am not fully sure what xCapture does. I'm not even going to attempt to explain what this does because I really don't know what it does. Another editor note, I looked up what this does. It's basically a tool that allows you to take data that would be coming from another program called Gladiator, and it can detect that data and turn it into an FSEQ file, which is the main file your program is stored in that you make in xLights, and that way you can upload it to FPP or xScheduler if you wanted to use those. Don't ever worry about having to learn fully what this does. You won't need it. And that is everything that's important in the tools menu. And then in the view menu, you could zoom in and out of the sequencer view. Once we're over there, I'll show you what that looks like. You could reset toolbars. You could show the xLights toolbar. So this will show any xLights effects that you can use. I don't know what they do because I don't use xLights in xLights. You can also show some other xLights settings. Perspectives, this is basically when you get into the sequencer tab, there's some different windows. You could select which ones you want to be open, and then you could save it as like a default perspective, or if you want to switch to another one, you could switch. And then windows, once you're in the sequencer tab, these are all the different windows you can have open. Audio, this allows you to change the speed of your audio track that you are listening to. So you could speed it up a lot. You could slow it down. So if you're trying to precisely sequence something, you could slow the audio down to a quarter speed so you can listen to it very slowly. You could change the volume level to very quiet, medium, silent. I keep it on loud, which is normal. Right here on import, you can import effects if you had the sequencer open. And then the final menu, the help menu, this gives you a lot of resources for help, like the user manual, tip of the day, if you want to look at that. Zoom, this will open Zoom, not like zoom in anything, the Zoom app, video conference app. xLights has their own Zoom room you can join. If you're having any problems, there's usually a couple people in there that can help you. You could share your screen, and if you can't set something up right or you're unsure what to do, there's a lot of people in there that's been into this hobby for years, and they can help you fix almost any problem. The keybinds, this once again opens your keybinds, except this, you can't edit them on this page. This just shows you which keybinds do what. And then some other things like video tutorials. If you click this, this will take you to the xLights video website where they have a ton of tutorials on there for xLights. Release notes, this will show you any updates. So like if I click this, this will show me every single update that's been added to xLights since I think 2017. If we scroll all the way down, nope, past 2017, 2016, and then back when they went by version 4 and then 3 and 2 and all that. Then they have a Facebook page where you can also go for help or updates about xLights. They have a donate button. If you like the software and you'd like to give back, you can donate. You can click check for updates and it'll tell you if there's any new updates. And then you can click about, and this is like their privacy policy and all of the legal stuff, if you want to call it that. Going back over to the file, I'm going to go through the preferences. The preferences menu is a menu where you could change a bunch of settings based on how you would like them to be set up. The first tab we have up here is the backup tab. xLights always tries to make sure that you never lose any of your work because sequencing can take a very long time, and if you lose it all, it's the biggest pain in the butt to redo it all. So xLights has a system to back up all of your files in a backup folder. That way if xLights crashes, anything that you have is saved within that backup folder, which is inside your main show folder. So you can have it backup on save and backup on launch. Backup on save, you usually don't have to check that. That is making a lot of backups. Anytime you save a sequence, it's going to back your entire folder up. I don't really recommend checking that. You don't need to have it back up that often. But backup on launch, that's what I do recommend checking. Anytime you launch xLights, it will create a new backup. And then backup subfolders, please make sure you check this, because if your sequences are held within another folder inside your main folder, that is not going to be backed up. It will only back up the files directly in the main show folder unless you click backup subfolders. So make sure you click that. And then purge backups, you can select how often the backups will be deleted. Anything older than 7, 30, 90, or 360 days, you could choose to purge, or you could choose to never purge backups. But I purge backups older than 360 days. That's worked out fine for me. And then backup directory, you can select it for use show folder, or you can unselect this and select your own backup folder. I just leave this checked. This always works for me. And if you want an alternative backup directory, you could browse one and make your directory here. The view tab, this is a couple settings that you can adjust for how you like your views with things. Tool icon size, that is like the size up here of all of these different effects that you'll use in the sequencer tab. You can make them small, medium, large, extra large. I leave everything on small. You can adjust the model handle size. The effect assist window, which I'll go over later when we get to sequencing, you could select that to be always on and open, always off, or auto toggle. I never use it, so I leave it always off, and if you're new to this, you'll probably never use that window either, so leave it always off. Show play controls on preview. What this does is if you open your house preview to see what it looks like in full screen, it will give you the option, the play, the pause, the stop button within that window. And then auto show house preview. This one, it's a little bit annoying when you check this. Anytime you go to play the sequence, it will automatically show your house preview. But when you stop the sequence to go and adjust things, the house preview will go away, so it's out of your way. And that gets very annoying because when you're pausing and playing the sequence, it will keep coming on and off and on and off. So I don't usually check this. In here are some settings that might look a little bit confusing. The only ones you might want to adjust are like snap to timing marks. When you make your timing marks to move the effects near, you could check this and it will snap them to the timing marks. And then some other settings you might want to change. All of this is usually fine to leave on default. The only thing you might want to change is the autosave interval, which is right here. This is how often it autosaves. Please turn on autosave. Turn it on no matter what, even if it's annoying, because xLights does crash frequently, especially with slower computers. And if you have autosave disabled and you forget to save for like an hour and you spend a whole hour working, you are going to be so mad when you lose that progress. I've had that happen to me so many times, so please at least set some interval to autosave. I leave mine right at 3 minutes, and that always is fine for me. It doesn't bug me too much. Just make sure you have it set to at least something. For basic stuff, you probably won't need to change any of the settings under output. Check sequence. What this does is you can just disable certain things xLights will look for when you have it check your sequence. xLights has a feature where it can check your sequences for certain things that aren't working. Random effects. What this does is there's a feature in xLights where you can have it create random effects for your sequence for certain sections or the whole thing. This allows you to select which effects you want it to use and which ones you don't want it to use. You probably won't be using create random effects, but if you do, you can go through here and select which effects you want to work and which ones you don't want it to select. Colors under here, this allows you to change colors of certain items in xLights. For example, like your timing tracks, you could change what colors they show up as. You could change the colors of like words if you import lyrics, phrases, and a whole bunch of other things. I've never changed these. I just use the default colors. And then under other, there are a few things I'd recommend looking at or changing depending on what you want. The bottom part right here, tip of the day, you could select for xLights to give you a tip of the day if you wanted to, and what level you want it to be to. And then the other one I'd recommend setting is your email address, and putting in an email address right here. You don't have to do that, but what this does is if for some reason xLights crashes and they want to figure out why that bug happened, they might want to reach out to you and ask if you could give them any files from what happened to see if they could fix it. So if you put in your email, they will have a way to reach out to you. I've never heard in my time of using xLights that they've had to reach out to someone with their email in here. So you really don't have to put this in here. They might never use it, but I do, just in case for some crazy reason they have to. And that is all of the preferences that you should probably take a look at that you might want to change. The other ones are pretty advanced, and you probably wouldn't be needing to change them much on a basic level. So once you're done with this, you can hit OK. And now that is all the menus, so now we can move on to the Layout tab. So in the Layout tab, this is where you design or set up what your layout will look like. You can drag any one of these props or any custom props that aren't here onto your layout right here and make it look like how your house is going to look, how you plan on having it look, or whatever you want. So if you already know exactly what you want, like you want a certain number of candy canes, wreaths, trees, arches, whatever, you can set that up right now. But if you don't know what your house is going to look like and you don't have a plan yet, you just want to design some stuff and see how it'll look, you could still do that and sequence a song. And you could go back into it later and add new props or get rid of old props, and it won't mess up anything in your sequence other than what's programmed on that prop. So if I program a whole sequence and then later I'm like, oh, I wanted to add a tree in some certain spot, I can still add the tree, but I just have to go back through the sequences and add effects to the tree. But you don't have to have any specific plan. You could just start designing what you want your house to look like right now, even if you don't know that's what it'll look like. So the first thing I should go over for when you're making your layout, there are two options you have. You can have it in either 2D, which it's in right now, you just can't see anything because there's no pictures or props yet. Or you can have it in 3D by checking this 3D box. And then it puts this little grid down, and you can move with your mouse around and take a look at your house. You can upload like a model of your house here, a picture of your house, and looking at your light show like this is a lot cooler than 2D. For example, this is my Christmas layout and it's in 3D, and it's so cool because I can move around the entire house however I want, and I can see the light show from completely different angles. Like I have some saved viewpoints, and I'll get over how to do these later. Like if you're driving west on our road, this is how it'll look if you're looking at the house driving west. If you're driving east, if you're coming around our corner that we have down the road, what the house will look like. So you can create so many different previews, and it looks awesome. The only problem is setting up a 3D layout is extremely difficult and way more challenging than 2D. I only started using 3D last year, and the reason why was because I had a lot of layers of props, like things in front of other things, and it was starting to get hard to look at it from 2D. But making the model for my house was very hard because I have no experience with 3D modeling, and you have to know all of that and how to import models and pictures. So if you're new to all this, I'd recommend just sticking to 2D because 2D still works perfectly fine, and it still lets you preview your house like if you were standing in front of it. So I won't be going over how to set up 3D, but if that's something you're interested in, then you can check out this video right up here I've made about how to use 3D in xLights. But the first thing you want to do for 2D is you're going to want to set a background image. And you don't have to do this, but I really recommend it. It makes it a lot easier to put your props on it. So you come over here to background image and you click it, and you click these three little dots, and then you can go through your files and find a picture. So I have a picture of my house right here. This is a bit of an older picture, so eventually I'm gonna have to update it. But with your picture here, you can click this fill button and it will fill in the entire box if you want it to. If you look, it only stretches it a little bit because I have my layout size set to 1280 by 720, which is HD. And these extra bars are only because of how I have the screen stretch right here. But if I move this out all the way, it will eventually fit. So you could set the resolution that you want for your preview. I'd recommend just leaving it 1280 by 720. That works fine. And then another thing I do is I reduce the brightness by a lot because it makes it look like it's nighttime. So let's go down to 30. When I'm actually programming, I have the brightness down to 4 or 5, and I can still see the house decently well, but it's very dark, so it looks like it's nighttime. There are some other settings down here, but you don't really have to worry about it. Just once you have your image up here, you can start adding your props to it. So I'm going to get started adding some of these models, and I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to start with the arches. Now, the way you add a prop is you click the element once. So like if I click the arch, it's selected, and then you click anywhere on the layout where you want this arch, and I'll just click it here for now, and then it gives you the option to move it, and I'm holding left click right now so I can adjust it wherever I want. I'll just leave it there for now because we can move it later. That red line at the bottom, that tells you if it's level or not. So right now it's level. I'm going to let go of left click, and then it created this arch. And now I have a lot of settings over here that I can go through and adjust. So for this arch, I can move it by left clicking it, and I'm holding left click and I'm moving around. And I can click any of these boxes to adjust the size of it, and I'm holding left click right now to adjust it. And then you can click and hold this top box to make it a really tall arch or a shorter arch. If you wanted to zoom in to the entire picture of your house without any model selected, you can use your scroll wheel to zoom in and zoom out. And if you want to move the picture side to side, you can hold down your scroll wheel and move your mouse. So I could zoom in here, and then I'm holding my scroll wheel and I'm moving it to the side. And then if you want to get it back to where it was, you can right click the picture or anywhere on here and hit reset, and then it'll bring it back to here. So before I put this arch where I want it, I'm going to go over the different settings that you have right here to adjust with the arch. All of your models will show up right here, and you can click the different ones to adjust each one. The first setting at the top is the name, so you can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to leave it at arches for now. And then this, you can click this button right here, and this will enable it to be a layered arch. So there are different types of arches that you can buy. They have a single one like I have here, and then they have layered ones where there's multiple layers in each arch. So let's say I have like a 3-ring arch. So I could click this box and some extra settings are given to me. And let's set the layers to, not 30, 3 layers. So right now the arch is set to have 52 pixels, or nodes. They call them nodes in xLights. And the 50 are in the first ring, and then there's 2 others in the second and third rings that I haven't specified how many pixels are in those rings yet. So I could go into this layers plus sign, click that. This little drop down comes, and I can select how many pixels I want in each layer. So let's just do 50 for each and see how that looks. So the pixels are a little bit more dense in the middle because they are closer together, whereas the outside ones are spread more apart. But now I have a 3-ring arch right here. However, I just want it to be one single ring arch for now. So I'm going to unclick the layered arch button. And then the nodes per arch, that is how many pixels are in the arch. So I have arches that have 50 pixels in them, so I'm going to set mine to 50. And then there's another setting right here, number of arches. This is how many arches you want total within this one arch model. So I could set this to 3, and now it created 3 arches, and I can make them a little bigger, like that. And there are still 50 pixels per arch because I have the nodes per arch set to 50. The next setting is lights per node. This is basically how many lights there are within the pixel. And I'm not talking about how the 3 LEDs inside a pixel, red, green, blue, that wouldn't count here. What I'm talking about is there are different types of lights sold, such as these ones in this picture, where each group of lights is technically only 1 pixel. So these lights right here, even though there's 3 lights within this segment, it's only 1 pixel because the data controls all 3 in that section. Now those lights can all be any different color, but they have to be the same color as the rest within that module because it's only 1 pixel in that segment. So this allows you, if you have 3 lights in 1 pixel, this would allow you to set that so it gives you the proper number of how many lights you'd see. But most standard pixels that you would probably buy only has 1 light per pixel. This is the pixel and it counts as 1 light. The next setting is the arc degrees. So if I didn't want this to be a perfect arch, I could set this to a lower number, like let's say 160, and it shrinks it a little bit, and I can make it go even lower, like 100, and it keeps shrinking the arch. The way my arches are set up, they're not a perfect 180 degrees, they're slightly less, so I usually leave mine at 170, and this works about fine for me right here. The arch tilt is how much it tilts to one side, so I could put in like 10, and now it will tilt this way, and I could put a negative sign in front of it, and it will tilt the other way, and I can make it tilt a lot, or if I don't want it tilting at all, I could just leave it at 0. The gap between arches, the higher this number is, the more of a gap there is between each arch. So if your arches aren't perfectly next to each other, you can put in a number there and make it a little bit of a gap. Next, the starting location. This is where the input of the pixel data will go and the direction you want the pixels going. So there's two options, the green and the blue square. So this is the green square right here. And if I put it here, that means this end of the pixels needs to be plugged into the controller, and the data will flow this way through the arches. Or I could choose the blue square and then have the data flow the other way. The next setting is the controller. This is where you can select which controller you want the pixels to go on. Or you can use the start channel, which is basically if you were to do it manually and type in the channels and universes like I talked about earlier. The main controller, this is the one we programmed or we set up back here in the controller tab right here. But for now, I'm just going to leave it at no controller. We don't have to have it plugged into a controller for now, since we're not actually doing anything with this layout. We're not going to be sending any of this data to the pixels. Individual start channels is another setting you'd have to use if you were doing the setup manually, where you put in the universes and channels. But since we're going to be letting xLights do everything for us, we're not going to have to use this. Now, there are some other settings down here, but most of them you won't need to use. I'll only go over the important ones. You can set a description if you wanted to. So, like, what these arches are for. Like, I could say, these are the arches for the yard, if I wanted to. Yard. Yeah, these are the arches for the yard. Then the preview setting right here. This is basically what preview you want these arches to go to. So you can make multiple previews up here with multiple different angles of your house, but usually one works fine. Maybe if you're on like a corner property, you might need to make another preview. So you can create another preview, and then you can have these arches set to go to whatever preview you want. I just leave it on default. And when you're using 3D, you don't have to use previews, so I've never had to use previews before. The other two that are here are the all models, so all the models will show up on this one preview no matter what. And then the unassigned preview, any models that have not been assigned to a preview will just go there. If you don't mess with the preview button, they'll always go onto this default preview, so if you don't need multiple previews, just leave it alone. Another setting right here that you might use is the submodels setting. Basically what this allows you to do, it opens this pop-up window when you click the three dots to edit it. It allows you to break the model down into pieces. So like, I could have half this arch be one section and the other half be another section and create it on here with the submodels and be able to control them differently. And it makes sequencing a little easier if you ever need to do that. Usually that's only done with bigger props like trees. I think some people might do it with big wreaths. Now, submodels is somewhat advanced and you usually don't need it if you're just trying to make a basic sequence. So I'm not going to cover how to set it up in this video, but I am planning a video in the future where I'll go over just how to use submodels. But moving on, the next tab we have on the settings for the arches is the controller connections. This is basically where we tell xLights which port and protocol we're going to be using for the controller that these arches are going to. You don't have to set this up, and when you're using xLights and letting xLights do all the work, it will do this for you, so you won't have to mess with these settings. The next section is string properties. This is where you tell xLights what type of pixels these are. There are a whole bunch of different options right here. Most pixels that you buy will be called RGB pixels, and it shows it right here, RGB. There are other pixels such as RBG, GBR, GRB, BRG, GBGR. And it can be a little confusing, but the RGB, or whatever the three letters are, stands for the order of the colors, how the chip inside the pixel tells which colors to light up. So RGB stands for red, green, blue. That means the order of the colors in the pixel will be going red, green, blue. So if we go back to the 3 channels that go to each pixel, if I was to turn on channel 1, 1 would go to the red pixel, because if you put it in order, 1 to red, 2 to green, and 3 to blue. But if I was to turn on the 3rd channel and was using, let's say, GBR pixels, the color order for those are green, blue, red. So instead of the blue light turning on when I turn on the 3rd channel, the red light would turn on when I turn on the 3rd channel. Basically, all you need to know out of all of this is look at the type of your pixels you have. They should say what type of color order they are, and just select which one you use. These are the top most common ones right here, these top 6. And from almost every place you buy pixels, they will be RGB. When you leave it on RGB, you won't have to mess with these other 2 settings either, because there's no need to, since they're just regular default pixels, if you want to call it that. Next is appearance. Here you could select some different appearance features for the arches. Like, I can make the pixel sizes bigger. Right now it's 2. I can up it to like 10. And now the pixels are giant. You could, if we zoom in, see how big they are. Or I could put them back to 2. I can select the pixel style, so I can make, instead of them being a smooth circle, let's make it a little bigger so you can see it. I can make it a square, so each of the pixels are squares. I can make it a solid circle, so they're not smooth. And I can make it a blended circle, so it looks like this. I use smooth because that's like what the default is, and I think that's what looks the best. You could set the transparency of the arches, so how much stuff you could see behind it. So if I put it at 50, which is half, you can now see half the props behind it, or half the light coming from the props. The other setting you might want to change is the tag color. So basically, when you're in the sequencer and you're looking for the prop on the list of models when you're sequencing, you can make it have separate colors so they stand out more. If you leave it on black, it will have no color and it'll just be in the list. I've never changed these colors before, and I always just leave them on black. But if you want to have colors for certain props, so you know, like anything yellow is maybe something from the yard and anything green is something on the roof, you could do something like that. And the final one is size and location. This is the coordinates basically of where on the layout the prop is. The Z coordinate, when you're in 2D, you will never have to worry about it, because the Z is the distance from front to back, going back and forth, which you never use because we're in 2D. So 2D is X, which is horizontal this way, and Y, which is vertical this way. You can also add some rotation and adjust a few other settings. And then this locked button right here, when you click that, it locks it so you cannot move the prop. I highly recommend, once you're done setting up everything, you lock your props, because I've gone into my layout multiple times and accidentally just clicked something and moved it, and then I have to go back through and get it exactly where I wanted it, and it's so annoying. So you could check this to lock it and unlock it. Now, for each individual element that's in this list, the controller connections and anything below it is always going to be the same settings for each thing. You will have the different options, and they'll all be the same across all models. The only thing that might have different settings is up here, depending on which prop it is. So now I'm going to right click the arch up here, and I'm going to delete this model. And I'm going to now go through the rest of them. Next in line is the candy canes. So I click it once, and then I can drag and make candy canes. They come in sets of 3 when you make them, but you could change this in a second. And one other thing I forgot to mention, if you double click the prop that you want up here, you could keep dragging, and every time you click somewhere, it's just going to make more and more candy canes. But we don't need all these candy canes, so I'm going to delete the extra ones. And you have to click this again when you don't want to make new candy canes. Because if you don't, and you want to go to click to like highlight props and select certain amount of props, you will just keep creating more candy canes. So here are the settings for the candy canes. You can select the name like you could with the arches. And then you can select how many canes are in here. So right now it's set for 3. I can make it 1 candy cane. Now it's one big one. Or I can make it 10 candy canes. Now it's 10 small ones, but I could adjust the size of it. I'm going to leave it at 3. Next is the nodes per cane. So how many pixels are in each candy cane. So we can make this a higher number if we want more pixels. I think 30, that looks pretty nice right there. Lights per node, this is the same as the arches that I talked about, how you can have multiple pixels in, or multiple lights inside of 1 pixel. We can adjust the height right here, so we can make this like shorter, or we can make it taller. I'm gonna leave it at 1 because that looked or not 41, just one, because that looked good. We can select the cane rotation, so like how much it leans one way or the other. So if I like set this to 20, it leans a lot this way. I can make it even more, not 2050, just 50. So it leans a lot this way. You can reverse the candy canes, so instead of the hook going to the right, we can make it go to the left like this by just clicking this reverse button. We could change the candy canes to sticks, so all they are just sticks that go up and down. These are kind of like the piece stakes. If you've ever seen those before, you could use this to set those up. And then we can uncheck that for it to be back to candy canes. The next button, alternate nodes. This is a very useful one because this determines the wiring for the candy cane. So it would be wired to go from the bottom up to the top. But then the problem is your ending pigtail for your pixels will be here. So it would look weird having a wire hang from there. So if you click this, it doesn't change anything you see, but what it changes is the wiring view, which I'll show you in a little bit after we're done with the rest of the props. If you look at the wiring view, the pixels will go, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it'll go 1, skip this one, 2, skip this one, 3. So it'll go back and forth, and then when it gets to the top, it'll go back and skip the other holes. So the beginning and the end wiring are at the bottom. It's something that's very useful if you don't want wires hanging from the ends of the cane. And then the rest of the settings below here are the exact same as the arches. If you click the starting location, you could change if it starts at the green square, then goes through to the blue square, or you could select the blue square and then have it go to the green square. And that's all the settings for the candy canes. Next, we have channel block. And what this is how you add AC lights, regular Christmas lights, into the layout. Like I've said before, I haven't used AC lights in xLights, so I don't know how to set up anything AC related. I think what you do here, and I may be wrong, so don't quote me on this, but you select how many number of lights are in the strand of AC lights, and you could select the color for what strand it is, and if the colors change, you could select them here. Just know if you plan on adding AC lights into the layout, but you're not sure which controllers to buy yet, there are no pixel controllers out there that can also run AC lights. AC lights and pixels are very different because AC lights take a very high voltage. They take 120 volts, which is what you'd usually get from an outlet inside your house. Whereas pixels take 12 volt DC power. It's completely different. So you would need to buy a separate controller if you want to run AC lights in your light show. Next, we have the circle. You can click this and make a circle. So kind of like a wreath. If you have a wreath, you could use this. You could select the number of strings, and the number of strings is how many times the prop connects to the controller. So let's say you have a very big circle of like 500 pixels, and you don't want all 500 pixels being plugged into one port because that's a little difficult to do for reasons such as power injection. If you don't know what that is, don't worry. We'll get into that in a different video. So this allows you to select multiple connections to the controller. So if I was to set like 3, that means there's going to be 3 different strands of pixels in here connected to 3 different ports on the controller. But it will still make one circle. They just will be different strands. You won't be able to tell when you're watching it or programming it. It's just how the wiring is in the back. You can select the number of nodes or pixels per string. So if there's 3 connections to the controller, how many pixels are going to be on each connection? If there's 50 times 3 is 150. So that would mean there'd be 150 pixels on here. If I want more pixels in this circle, I could just say like 100. And now there's a lot there. This next setting, center percentage, you only need to set this up if you have multiple layers in the circle. So if I wanted this to be like the arches example where I had 3 rings in the one arch, I could do the same thing and have 3 rings or more on this wreath. So let's type in 3 just to make this easy. And you'll see now we have the center ring and these 2 outer rings. If you click the plus sign next to the layers, you can select how many pixels are in each layer. So let's just type 100. And now you'll see there are 100 pixels in each circle part. Now this center percentage is how far the distance is between the rows or the layers in the circle. So if I set this to a higher number, there's less room between each circle. So this makes like a pretty nice looking wreath that we could put like, if we shrink this down a little bit, like right there between the windows. And then starting location, this is like the green and blue box setting, except it's a little different. So here are the different options, and like if we were to choose top, outer, and CCW, which stands for counterclockwise, that means you'd start at the top outer ring and go counterclockwise around, then into the middle ring, around, then into the last ring and around. We could choose top outer clockwise, top inner counterclockwise, top inner clockwise, bottom outer, and a bunch of other ones. And then the rest of the settings are once again the same, like they will be in all of the elements that you can add. Next we have the create new cube. This one is going to look a little weird since we're in 2D. You won't be able to tell what it is, but this is a 3D cube. So if we were quickly to switch to 3D, now you can see how it's a cube and I'm moving around. You can see it's cube shaped like, but in 2D, you can't really tell that it's a cube. So setting these up in 2D might be a little hard, but you can see, I think these pixels, the farther lower they go, the farther back they are. The different settings in this one is the start location. We can adjust that. So the front, bottom left, front, bottom right. You could pick different parts where you want the wiring to start. We could change the direction, so how the pixels will go. I'm just going to leave this in 3D quickly so I could show you how it would look that way. I think this might be a little easier to explain. So let's imagine this is the front face right here. This is the right side and this is the top. We could do vertical front to back. So I'm assuming this one would go up, down in the vertical and then move back a layer and do the same thing. And then we could do vertical left to right. So like it'd probably start on the side, go up and down this way and then work its way back. And then we can have it stack. Then we could choose the strand style. So if there's zigzag, no zigzag, if it alternates, and then if all the layers start at the same place. These 4 settings were for the wiring aspect of it, but the rest is how many pixels are in it. So we could have the height, the width, and the depth adjusted. So if I change the depth to like 10, now it's more of a rectangle shape. We could change the height to 10, and we could change the width to 10. And now it's a very dense cube with lots of pixels in it. And once again, you could choose the number of strings, so how many times it connects to the controller. So this cube would have 1,000 pixels in it. So let's say we want like 4 connections to the controller. We could type in 4, and then it'll be 250 pixels across 4 ports. It doesn't change how this looks at all. It just changes the wiring part of it. And then the rest of the settings are all the same as everything else is. Next, we have the custom one. When you drag this out, it doesn't make anything. All this is if you want to make your own custom prop, you click the model data right here, and then you basically select these little dots, which pixels you want to light up. So let's make this like 100 by 100 scale size. Let's see, and we make this a bit bigger. Let's make this the full screen so we could see it. Then we would go through with all these different holes and so like just basically draw the shape of our prop. Now this is another advanced thing, so I'm not going to go over this in this video. You probably also won't be making custom models if this is your first time running a light show. The other 2 settings you can adjust on here is the number of strings, how many connections to the controller it makes again, and you could also add a background image to it if you wanted to. Next one is another advanced one. I'm not even going to put it on here. This is just basically any item that takes DMX data, such as a moving headlight, like the ones you see in Tom Betgeorge's amazing light show. Servos, so like motors that can move back and forth. Anything that has like actual parts moving, or floodlights that use DMX. Don't ask why, you can just create a skull. I'm not going to be covering any of this though, because I guarantee you're not going to be spending thousands of dollars on moving headlights if this is your first light show, because that would be really overkill. But actually, everything we do in this hobby is overkill, so if you do spend tens of thousands of dollars on moving heads, good for you, I'm not going to judge you. But moving on, the next one we have is create an image. This is not a pixel prop. All this is if you wanted to add an image somewhere in here. So you drag it out, then you select your image. Let me just pick a random image. Oh yeah, so random picture of a donut. That's what we will pick. I found this random picture of a donut on my computer. So we could just drag a random picture of a donut anywhere we want. Yeah, let's put a giant picture of a donut on the roof because that's what we would do for a Christmas light show. Next, we have icicles, which are self-explanatory. The options for settings over here, you can adjust the number of strings. Once again, the number of connections to the controller, the number of pixels or nodes per connection to the controller, and then the drop pattern. So what this is how the drop pattern looks. So it's set for 3, 4, 5, 4. So there's 3 pixels, then 4 pixels, then 5 pixels, then 4, and then it repeats itself. So if you have something different, like let's say, I don't know, 4, 6, 5, 7, that's a really random one. You can set that up too. And you just put it in, or you put a comma between each number. And then they have the alternate nodes box again that you can check. And that will make it skip the nodes so the wiring doesn't hang down from the bottom. It will go like, let's say for this 7 one, it will start here at this top one, bounce down to this one. This is pixel number 2, number 3, number 4, then go back up number 5, number 6, number 7. That way there's no wiring hanging down below it. And then you can also choose the green square or the blue square for the start of the wiring. And then, like always, all of the other settings are the same. Next, we have the matrix. This is a really cool one because this allows you to make screens in your light show if you want to. You can put together really dense matrices and have like videos be able to play over them and be able to see text or anything. If you have a TV in your light show, which I know like a lot of people put a TV in their window, you would use the matrix to set that up and you just make it a really dense matrix. If you're also using a panel in your light show, you'd use a matrix to set this up. The first setting is the direction, whether it's horizontal or vertical. So do we want the wiring to go this way, back and forth, or do we want the wiring to go this way? You could choose alternate nodes once again, so the wiring ends up on one side. And then you could choose the number of times this is connected to the controller. The way this is set up right now is each one of these different strands, they're 50 pixels long. They will each have their own connection to the controller. So this will be 1 port, 2 ports, 3 ports, 4 ports, 5 ports, so on and so forth. You could select the number of pixels per string, and then the strands per string is how many times each string will zigzag before it ends. So if I set this to 3, this one strand will go this way, then this way, then this way, and be one strand. So it's going to make it very dense vertically. And it's actually yelling at me because 3 does not divide into 50 evenly, and we must select an even number. So if we pick 5, that works better. So now basically, if you look, it's very dense vertically, and there are still 16 connections to the controller, and each connection zigzags back and forth 5 times while using all 50 pixels. So that means there's 10 rows of pixels. Now, if we did some adjusting with the settings, we can make this a really dense screen. I could set that if I really wanted to 1280 and then select the number of strings to 720, and I am going to crash it. Okay, it didn't crash. This is a miracle. And now we have this super dense screen. This is the equivalent to an HD screen. This would take so many pixels, and the only way I'd recommend doing this is if you had panels or a TV. And if you have a TV, you should not use the resolution of the TV in here. So if it's like a 4K TV, do not make it so that this is equivalent to 4K. xLights will not be able to handle it. Your computer will not be able to handle it. And this will be the end result. The projector that we use in our light show, that is an HD projector. It can go up to 1920 by 1080 for pixels in it. I had it set so it only went 170 something pixels by 90 pixels. And that still made my computer run very slow when I had to render it. And then you could select the start location, which corner you want the wiring to start for, if you were to wire this massive beast together and have millions of dollars to buy millions of pixels. And then there is this setting called the low definition factor. I've actually never messed with this before. I don't even remember this being here. So this might be a new feature. I am not sure what it does though, but it looks like the number can range from 1 all the way to 100. So I'm not sure what that does, but it's there. The next item we have is probably the most basic item that you'll use all the time in your layout. It is the single line, and it's basically what it says in the name. It creates a single line of pixels. Super simple. You could use this to outline a fence. You could use it to outline your roof. Literally anything where a single line of pixels that doesn't really need to be bent would be used. Over here in the settings, it is super simple to set up. You have the number of strings, the number of connections to the controller, how many times you want it to plug into the controller. You have the number of nodes or pixels a strand, so we can up this to like 100 if we want 100 pixels there. We can make it a ton, like 300, and then you can't even tell where the pixels are because there's so many. And then you could set the starting location for the wiring if you want to start at the green or the blue square. The green square is here and the blue square is there. And then, like always, for the 100th time, all of the other settings are the same. Next, we have the polyline, which is basically a single line, but multiple of them. So what you do is you click to start the line, and you can make the first line. And then when you want that line to end, you click where you want to end, and it will create a new line. And you could keep doing this over and over and over. So for example, I could outline the roof with this polyline by going like that, and then touching this corner, touching that corner, coming over here and touching about there, and then back down to here. So once you're done placing your final line, it will still want to make a new line. So once you're done, you can push escape to stop creating lines. Now for the settings on here, the first one is how many nodes are in it, the number of pixels in it. So we could set this to like 200 or maybe even more, because that's not that dense. So let's try like 300. That looks about good. The number of lights per node, so how many lights are in the pixel, like I went over before. The number of connections to the controller, the number of strings, and the start location, whether you want to start the green or the blue square. If we start the green square, the wiring is going to go this way, and if we start the blue square, the wiring is going to go this way. The drop pattern is how many pixels, if any, you want to drop, kind of like icicles. So I could make this 3, and now it's like 3 sections of pixels. So there's 3 rows on top of each other. I'm going to just leave it at 1 for a single line. If you did have multiple, you could select alternate drop nodes, so it will go back and forth. Like I went over with the icicles, that way your wiring's always on top or bottom or wherever you want it to be. The height is how far you want the rows to be spread apart. So I could put in the number like 4, and I will spread it out. And then the bigger the number, the bigger the gap. Individual segments. This checkbox right here is if you want each of these segments of lines to have individual pixel numbers. So you could check this box, and then if you click this little plus button right here where it says individual segments, it will show each segment that you have up here. So let's say on the left and right, we want there to be 20 pixels on each of those sides. We could do that. And then let's say on the top and bottom, so segment 1 is the bottom right here, and segment 3 is the top right here. Let's say we want segment 1 to have 200 pixels, but we want the top to have less, so we could type in 100 pixels. And now each of the segments have their own number of pixels. And then the rest of the settings, you have the string properties, appearance, size, location, all the same as the other ones. Next, we have the sphere, and this is again another hard prop to show in 2D. But when you make it, it's supposed to look like a sphere. In 2D, it's kind of hard to tell. If I was to switch to 3D, you could see that this is a 3D sphere right here. For the sphere settings, you could set how many degrees you want the sphere to be. So if it's 360, it will make a complete circle. If it's 180, it will be half a circle. So if we switch to 3D, you can see that this sphere is half of a circle. We could set the southern and northern latitude, which is basically how close it comes to a point at the bottom. So if I was to change this to, like, let's say 40, it doesn't come as close at the top. But for the upper value, you can only go up to 89 for how close it can get. So we can make it a little less close, like 70, and we can make the bottom a little less close by doing negative 70. So now it doesn't come to a complete point at the top or the bottom, but that could be a good thing, because when you're wiring props, it can be very hard to get a ton of pixels in a small space. So if you already have a frame or some sort of prop built for this, you might want to look at it and see how close the pixels come at the top, so you can know what to set the latitude to. Next, we have the number of strings, the number of connections to the controller. If you want this to only make 1 connection to the controller, we could set it to 1. Now you'll notice it's only 1 singular line right here for the sphere. We could set the total nodes a string. So let's say we want 100 It's going to be a very dense line, but then we can adjust the strands per string. So how many times it zigzags back and forth. And we can use this to make it circular again. Let's say like 20 times. 20 was a bit too much. Let's try 10. And there we go. Now it zigzags back and forth 10 times using all 100 pixels total. For the starting location, we could choose the top left or right and the bottom left or right. And then that is all of these settings for the sphere. Next, we have the spinner, which I'm not really sure how to describe it. It looks kind of like a fan almost, if you wanted to say. The settings for this are how many connections to the controller. We have it for 1. How many arms there are per connection to the controller. So right now there's 5. We could up this to 10. So now there's 10 arms. If we were to add another string, so 2 connections to the controller, there'd be a total of 20 arms because there's 10 per connection to the controller. So if I was to change this to 2, now there's a lot more. Then you could choose how many lights there are per arm. So right now there's 10 pixels in each arm, but we could up that to like 20 if we wanted to. The start angle, you could put this in if you don't want this to be perfectly aligned, because right now the top and bottom, they're perfectly up and down. But we can adjust this. Let's say if we put in 10, it'll tilt it a little bit to the side, and we could keep tilting it if we wanted to, like 20. So it's, let's try 15. That looks like it'll be more in the middle. Nope, let's try 17. And that looks about for the middle of it to be between these 2 arms. But now the left and right arms, they are perfectly straight. We can adjust how hollow we want it to be in the middle. So if we want the pixels to be farther away from the middle, we can up this number to like 40. So now they're farther away. Or we can put them super close, like putting in a number like 5. And now they get really close to each other. The arc setting tells it if this makes a full circle. So if it's at 360, it will make a full circle. But if we put it at like 180, it will do a half circle. We could do a quarter of a circle by putting in 90. We could do 3/4 of a circle by putting in 270. Or we could just leave it at 360 for a complete circle. Then we have the start location for where the wiring comes in. You can have it start at the center going counterclockwise, the center going clockwise, the end going counterclockwise, the end going clockwise, then the center alternate counterclockwise, and the center alternate clockwise. And then you can also check this box if you want the wiring to zigzag. And that is all of the settings for the spinner. Next prop we have is the star. It is exactly what it says in the name. The settings for this are the number of connections to the controller, 1 connection, the number of strings, the number of pixels per string, number of nodes. Let's set that to a bigger number. Let's try 200. That looks pretty good, a nice dense star. The number of points in the star, how many different points you want in the star. Right now it's 5. We can up that to like 7, which is a really weird number. 8 if you wanted to. You can make it 4. You can make it 2 if you wanted to, but then that looks weird. There's a ton of different settings for the starting location, so you can look at these. There's some like the top center counterclockwise, top center clockwise, top center counterclockwise on the inside. Multiple different ones. I'll let you look through those. You can adjust how many layers there are in the star. So if it's 1 layer or multiple layers, like we can make it 3 different layers. When you do this, it will only add 1 pixel into the 2 other layers. So we have to click the layers button and adjust how many pixels are in each layer. So we could put like 50 in each layer. Let's see how that looks. It looks like the outer layers might need a lot more pixels in them to make them look better. So let me adjust that. The outer to inner ratio is basically how close the corner of the star goes to the middle. So if we like lower this number, the point will be basically very far away. We can up the number a ton, and that will make the star's corners go very close to the middle. 2.62, that is the normal star ratio that this is left at. The inner layer percentage is how close the pixels are to the middle. The bigger this number, the farther away from the middle they are. So if I make it 50, they're farther away. I can make it like 75, make them super far away. Or I could bring them back in a little bit, like 66. I think for this, 50 looks pretty good. And then like always, the rest of the settings are the same as everything else. Going with the star, you could create a new mega tree if you wanted to, or just tree. It's called tree in here. You can use this to create little trees or big trees. I'll just make a big tree for right now. There's a couple of different settings in here that I'll go over. So there's 3 different types of trees. The first one is round, which is the most common used tree. There's the flat tree. So this is like if you wanted to put pixels flat up against a wall or something. It still is somewhat tree shape, except it's flat. And then the other one is a ribbon tree. But I'm going to leave it around because that is the most common tree. This setting right here, the degrees, is how many degrees the tree is. So if it is 360, it's going to make a full circle. You're going to be able to have pixels on all sides of the tree so you can view it from every direction. If it is 180 degrees, it's a half tree. So the back half won't have any pixels. This works great if you don't have any people on the back side of your tree. It would be a waste putting pixels back there. So our mega tree sits right here. This is an older tree that we don't use anymore. So I'd put this like right there. And it's a half tree because you have no need to put pixels in the back half of the tree. No one would see them, and it's a waste of pixels. You can make it a 270 degree tree if you wanted to add more to the back, but not all the way. Or you could make it a 90 degree tree, a very small front tree if you wanted to. But I'll leave it at 180. The rotation setting, that is how far rotated to a side the tree is. So if you wanted your tree to be like facing more this direction on the road, we could turn the rotation to like 40. And now if you look, it turned the tree a little bit. So more of the empty space is facing this way. If we were to go into 3D, you can look at it. The tree points mostly to this direction now. Or we could type in a negative number to have it go the opposite direction. The spiral wrap setting, this is a setting you can use to make the tree like spiral down. So if we set this to like 1 wrap, it makes 1 wrap around the tree. So the pixels go this way around it and then up to the top. This makes a really cool design, but making this actually work in real life is very hard. You have to build some sort of frame to be able to hold it. We can make it wrap multiple times, like 3. And now it wraps around 3 times. Or you can leave it at 0 if you just want a regular tree. The bottom to top ratio, that is how small or how close together these pixels get compared to the bottom. So if we make this like a lower number, there's going to be more of a point to the top of the tree. Actually, that is wrong. The bigger the number, the closer together it gets. So if I up this to 12, all of the pixels get really close together. If I make this a really low number, like 3, the pixels are very far apart. The perspective setting, this tilts the tree forward and backwards if you needed it tilted at all. So I could type in a number and now it tilts a little bit towards me. If you have a slope on your yard, you could use this to adjust towards the slope. So if your tree points down a little bit, you could set that. Or if it's just flat land, you can leave it 0 and then it's a regular tree. The alternate nodes checkbox, this basically does what it's done in other props. It will alternate the nodes back and forth. So instead of a straight line going all the way up, it'll go 1, skip this pixel 2, skip this pixel 3, skip 4, 5, 6, and then the other skip pixels, it will come back down this way. So both your connections are at the bottom of the strand. So this could be really useful to put all of your pigtail ends at the bottom. Next is strand direction. This is the direction of the strand. So right now it's set for the strands to go upwards. And if you have like multiple on one strand, it could go up, then down, then up, then down, then up, then down. Or you could set it to horizontal. So your strands go from left to right, up and making its way up. I use vertical, and if you use horizontal, I think you have a problem, because horizontal just makes absolutely no sense, so I recommend you use vertical. Number of strings, how many times the prop is connected into the controller. So you would need 16 ports for this. Each of these rows is on its own port, so like this row all the way over here is on its port, this row has its own port, this one and this one and this one. But if you wanted, let's say, 4 zigzags to be on one port, across 4 ports, because 4 times 4 would still make 16. We could set 4 connections to the controller. At first, it will only make 4 lines, but we can adjust that in a second. Then we could come down to the strands per string, the number of zigzags, put 4 in there, and then each line zigzags up, then down, then up, then down to make 1 strand. Now, it's yelling at me because 4 does not divide into 50 equally. The number of nodes per string, this is how many total pixels are on that string, not on each individual row, but how many is on the total string. Since one string goes up, then down, then up, then down, this is going to include the total number of pixels for that. So if we wanted 50 pixels on each row or up and down direction, we would need to set this to 200. That way it could divide into 4 and make 50 per section. So this number, the number of nodes per string and the strands per string, this has to divide equally into this number or it will yell at you. You could set the starting location, so whether you want to start at the top left or right or the bottom left and right. Most people leave the starting location at the bottom left or right. That's just easier than running wires up to the top. And then the rest of the settings are the same, like I've said 1 bajillion times. Next is create new window frame. What this basically does is make a window frame like it says. So we could use this to like outline any of these windows if we wanted to. You can give it a name, and then you could select how many pixels are on the top, the left and the right, and the bottom. The reason why the top and bottom are separate from the left and right is that way you can use this as a door. So if like we put this, let's say, around the door, but oh no, we have pixels at the bottom. Well, we could set the lights on the bottom to 0. So now there's no lights down there. And then we can select how many lights we want at the top. Like we can make the top 20. And then if we want like 30 pixels on each side, we could put in 30. And now there's 30 pixels on each side of the door. Now, when I first used xLights, I thought I had to have the top and the bottom the same. And that is why for the first year of my light show, you see that we have lights underneath our door. That is because I didn't know there was a way you could use this window frame and not have lights under the door. And then you could select the start location for it and the direction of it. So if this was a full window frame, let's make it a full window frame. We want it to start at the bottom left. We can have the wiring either go clockwise around it or counterclockwise around it. That is all of the different settings for the window frame. Next, we have create new wreath. You can use this to make a wreath. You could also use the circle to create a wreath, but they have a wreath model in here, so we're going to use that. The number of strings, how many times it connects to the controller. The number of nodes per string. We can increase this to, let's say, like 100. And then we can select where the pixels start and which direction they go in. And that is all the settings that the wreath has. There's no other settings. So if you have a wreath with like multiple segments in it, you're going to want to use the circle because this allows you to create multiple segments. The wreath just makes one circle that's not even symmetrical. And then these last 3 models aren't models in xLights. What you do with these is import stuff. So if we click the import one, make a box, this will allow you to import a model from your files if you have one saved in here. It has to be a model with an extension of .xmodel, .lff, .lpf, or .gdtf. I don't have any models I can import, so I can't show you that. The next one is create a new download. What this is if you bought a prop from a store like Boscoyo or Gilbert Engineering, and it's something that's not in xLights, you can use create new download, and it will download all the vendors lists from tons of different stores besides just Boscoyo and Gilbert Engineering. Currently, it includes models from Boscoyo Studios, Gilbert Engineering, EFL Designs, Custom Christmas Creations, Build a Light Show, and a few others. So let's say we had a special singing face from Boscoyo Studio. If you don't know, a singing face is basically a prop that you can make sing with your light show. So we would go under Boscoyo Studios and we can look under the Christmas section if we had a Christmas one. And we can look throughout here to see which one it might be under, probably under singing elements. I'm going to find the one I use in my light show. You can look for which one you bought. I think I have the Chroma Bulb 30-inch standing. Yep, this is mine right here. So it will grab this model data and then you can hit insert model and it will put it in here for you. And then you can adjust the size for how you need it. So mine is usually right here on my roof. So I can adjust that and put it right there. There are 3 different settings. Once you put a download in here that you could change the model data, which is basically where the pixels are and in what number they go. This is very advanced and there's a lot of different settings in here, so I'm not going to go over it. You usually shouldn't have to change this if you're importing a model. You can adjust the number of strings, the number of connections to the controller. So if you have a very dense prop and you don't want 1 connection to the controller, you want like 4, let's say, you can adjust this for how many connections to make to the controller. And then you can add a background image behind it if you wanted to. The final model you can add is add an OBJ. This only works if you are in 3D. You can't click it and it won't let you add it. Basically what it allows you to do is import a 3D model of something that you've made in another piece of software. An example is like Blender. You can make 3D models and then import them, like I did to import the layout of my house. My house is a very generic house. It's just a box with a roof on top. So my house was very easy to make a model for. If I had a house that looked something like this, and I had to make a 3D model for it, I probably would still be using 2D. And that is all of the different models up here and how you can add them into xLights. Now, there are a few other things I want to go over, so I'm going to create a model. I'm just going to create this tree right here, and I'll leave it right there. I want to go over some of the settings that show up when you right-click the model. Like, if you right-click it here in the models list, you can delete the model, you can lock the model, you can unlock the model. Basically, like you do down here, under size and location, how you can check this lockbox. You can also do it up here. You can view the node layout, which tells you which strings go to which nodes. The end nodes, that's basically pixels, and it will say, like, if it's 12, that is pixel 12 on S11 or strand 11. You can open a wiring view, which is a very useful tool. I'm actually going to make a different model to show you it on because showing it on a tree is kind of hard. I'll make some candy canes. And let me just adjust some of the settings quickly to make it denser. If you right click it and hit wiring view, this will allow you to look at how the pixels are wired on the prop. So this is looking at it from the back side of the candy canes. It says it right here, caution reverse view. So there are 3 different strings of pixels, 3 connections to the controller. And this is the first candy cane since we're looking at it from the back. And it shows you this is the way you wire it. You go upwards this way. If you had props like that singing face that I showed you, it will show you the proper way how you wire it up and wire the face. You can't just shove the pixels in there anyway because xLights programs them a certain way on how to expect you to wire it. And for the most part, xLights allows you to easily change the wiring view for any prop the way you want to wire it. But certain ones like downloaded models, they're very hard to change the wiring view, so you have to follow the way it does it in xLights. Next, you could export this as a custom xLights model or export it as any other file type. You could flip the prop horizontally, so now I flipped the candy canes, so now they're horizontal. You could flip it vertical if you wanted to. I don't think it's going to allow me to. I'm clicking it, but it won't do anything. It does allow me to flip the tree vertical, so now it's an upside down tree. You can replace a model with this model, so if I click this, I could select to replace the tree with this, and now it got rid of the tree and added that there. You can also push Control-Z on Windows. I'm not sure if that's the same shortcut on other computers, but on Windows it's Control-Z for undo, and you can undo what you just did. And then these other 3 settings down here have to do with model groups. And that is what I'm going to go over now. Model groups basically allow you to group together any models you want, and then when you're programming your sequence, instead of programming each individual model, which you could still do if they're in a model group, you could also program the whole model group. So I'm going to quickly outline all of these windows and doors and get back to you in a second so I can show you an example of this. So now I have all of these windows and doors outlined. Let's say I wanted to make a model group and call it all house face, or like the entire face of the house. So I can right click anywhere in this models section and click add empty group, and I can choose a name. So I'm going to call it all models on house face. Hit OK. And then there's a whole bunch of settings that it gives you within this model group that I'll go over in a second. But it shows you all the models that are not in the group right here, and all of the models that are in the group right here. So I can click any of the models I want and move them over this way. The way these models are named is it goes window frame 1, window frame 2, window frame 3, 4, and 5. So I can move them over like this. So if I click the model and then click the arrow, it moved the window frame, so it's now within the model group. And I can move all the other ones, and I can also hold Control while clicking these to select multiple models, and then hit the arrow and it will move them all over at the same time. You can also click the model within the group and move it back over here, or move it this way. And if you want them to be in order, any specific order, you can click it and click the up and down arrows to move it up and down in here, or you could just hold it and drag it yourself. So now all of these window frames are in a group. Now an example where the group could be useful is if you want all of these window frames to turn on red at once. you, instead of having to put a red effect on each individual window frame, you could put one single red effect on the model group, and it will immediately turn on everything within that group to red. An example where a model group would not be useful is if you want each individual window to be a different color. You want this one to be red, this one to be orange, yellow, green, and blue, let's say. You cannot put multiple effects on one model group, so you would still have to go and put each individual color on each individual model. The model groups just make it useful for when you want to put one effect on a whole group of models. It allows you to do that very easily. Now, some of the other settings down here show submodels to add. Like I said earlier, submodels are a little bit advanced. They are different sections within a model. You can select to show the submodels you have available and move over submodels into the group, but not the entire model if you wanted to. You could show inactive models to add models that you don't want on that have been set to inactive. And then you can select to show only the models in the current view. Like I went over, there's different previews. You can select only the models that you see in this preview to be able to be moved. The tag color, this is like I said with the other models, where when you see them in the model list, you can change this color so they'll show up as a different color in that model list to make it stand out more if you wanted to, or you can leave it on black to have no color. The center offset. This is basically where the center of the group is. So this plus sign is the center right here. We can move the X over to the left or the right. So like if I put this at, let's say 200, the plus sign has now moved over here. So the middle of the group is here. So you can move where the middle of the group is. Now, why is this useful? Well, let's say you have an effect like a pinwheel running and you want to put that on the model group. When you put a pinwheel on a regular model, it automatically goes to the center of that model. So if I put a pinwheel on this window right here, it's going to go into the center of this model. When I put a pinwheel on a group, it's going to go to wherever the center of the group is, which is right here. Now, for almost every single effect, you can change the X and Y of where the effect will show up. But generally, you want to put the plus sign to the middle area that you want to be of that group. The preview right here, this allows you to select which preview this group shows up in. So out of the different previews, I could make this group only show up in unassigned models if I wanted to, or any other ones I create. These last few settings set up how the effects are rendered on to the models. These are a little bit advanced, so I'm not going to go over them. Just leave them at the default and that will work all the time. Plus, you could change most of these settings on each individual effect that you're making. This is just what the default will be set to. If at any time you want to add more models to the group, you could come back down here, find your models right here, and move them over inside the model group. If you right click the group, it gives you some options right here. It will allow you to delete any empty groups. So if you've made groups but not used them, you can delete the empty ones. You can clone this group. You can rename it. You can delete it. You can create a group from everything you have selected. You can add the selections to an existing group and add an empty group. If we didn't want this group, we could just hit delete group. The final thing I want to go over in the layout tab is when you right click the screen, these settings that show up here. When you right click the screen when no models are selected, it gives you some different settings. You can save the layout image, so it will save this for you. You can print it if you wanted to. You can import previews, models, or groups. You can import LOR models or groups. LOR stands for Lightorama, and that is usually used for AC lights. So if you wanted to import like any AC models, you could. You can export the layout as a file. You can right click and hit reset, which resets your view. So like if I zoom in and move to like right here, it will reset to whatever the main viewpoint is that xLights chooses. Now, if you want to create your own default viewpoint, what you could do is first get to that viewpoint. So like, let's say I want it zoomed out like this to be the default. I could right click and hit set current viewpoint as default. So you click that. And then let's say you move around, you're adjusting things and you want to go back to that view. You can hit restore the default viewpoint, which was this. Now let's say you wanted another viewpoint called left. We can move it to the left right here if you want. I don't know why you'd want this, but let's just say you wanted this. Then you could come down to save current viewpoint, not as default, just as another one. If you don't want this to be the default, you just want this to be an option that you could choose from, then click this. You can put in the name, so I could put in left side of display, let's say. And now when you right click, you have some more settings. You can load a viewpoint, so any viewpoint you make will show up here. So I could click this and it will move it back over here. And I could delete any viewpoints. So I could click here and delete the left side of display. And I could hit reset to go back to the xLights generated default viewpoint. Now when you right click a model over here, it gives you all the settings that you'd see when you didn't right click with the model selected. So these few settings right here. And it also gives you all the settings that you see when you right click over here. So all of these settings I've already gone through, all of these different options. It just shows them combined if you were to click this or this. And that, my friends, concludes the entire layout tab. So before we move on, I'm going to quickly create a little layout right here, a little display that we can use when we move on to sequencing. So I got a little carried away and I was going to add way more models than this. My inner light show maker wanted to make this the coolest display ever with tons of models, but I want to keep this simple at the same time. So I tried to include a lot of the basic models that you might be using in your light show. I have windows, the door, I have a roof outline right here. I have a garage, a tree, a fence, and then some models on the fence. Now, this is never a display I would make because it's just not perfect. I wouldn't put a star on a fence when it could go on top of the tree, but I wanted to keep it close to the front so you could see it easier. And one other model I think I'm going to add, because this is a very common one, is an arch. So I'm going to add some arches there. So now I can also include those. They might be a little blocked right now, but you should be able to see them when I'm programming. I also went and created some different model groups for programming. I have one called All Models in Display. This is everything in the display, and I'm going to add the arches to it now too, so that's in it. So this is everything in the display, all the models on the fence, so anything that's on the fence, all the models on the house, so anything actually touching the house, and then all the models on the house face the front of the house. So I'm going to add the garage to this as well, because that's on the front of the house. And with that, we can click the save button. Always click the save button so you don't lose any of your progress. And with that, we can now finally move on to the sequencer tab and begin programming. So congratulations to making it this far in the video, and now we are going to begin talking about the sequencer tab. This is where all of the magic happens, and this is probably where you'll be spending 99% of your life programming the light show. So this is the sequencer tab, and there's a whole bunch of different little windows here, and right here is where your main timeline will be in a second once I open a sequence. There's some other windows too that aren't shown here, and they're in the top bar, but I'll go over all of those in just a second. First, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to go over all of these buttons up here and what they do, because these buttons only work in the sequencer tab. The first one is select show directory. This is another button you can click to change the show directory, the folder where all of your files are stored in. This button right here is create new sequence. This is what we'll be using in a second to create our new sequence. Over here we have open sequence, so you can open a sequence that you've been working on. You have save and save as for saving your sequence. This is the render button. This is what you click to render your sequence. It tells what pixels when to light up using the effects you have. These two buttons right here, these are your different settings as to how you can paste effects into the timing track. Once you lay effects down on the timing track, which I'll get into all of that in just a second, you can copy them by using Control-C or right-clicking and hitting copy, and then you could paste them into another part of the sequence. Paste by time basically means that whatever the effect you copy, if the effect is 2 seconds long, wherever you paste it, it will go and still be that 2 seconds long. Whereas paste by cell, if you copy the whatever effect is in the cell and you paste it in another cell, it will paste the effect to fit that cell and change the time of it. So let's say if the original effect takes up 100% of a 1 second cell, but then you paste it into another cell that's 2 seconds long, it will fill that whole cell by 100% because the last cell was filled by 100%. However, the effect will now be twice as long, 2 seconds, because it's set to fit that spot. If this doesn't make any sense, I'd recommend leaving it on pace by time because that one's a little bit easier to deal with when you're new to this. All of these buttons right here, these are the buttons that you'll use to play the sequence while you're watching it or programming it. Obviously, you have play, you have pause, and you have stop. This button takes you back to the first frame of the sequence. This takes you to the last frame of the sequence. This will replay the section you have highlighted. This button is output to lights. If you click that, it'll output this sequence to the lights as you play it. Now, this only works if the controller is hooked up to your computer and all of the settings are correct on it. So if you don't have a controller plugged in or you don't have a controller or lights at all, if you click this, it won't do anything. This whole section right here, this is the different windows you can open, like effect settings, that's this window. You can open effect colors, that's this window, and then there's some other ones I'll get into once we have a sequence open. These two buttons, they zoom in and out of whatever you're working on in the sequence. And this final button is the sequence settings. Now, I can't open it because there is no sequence open, but I will show you what this does in just a second. So, we're going to click this button, and we're going to make a new sequence. Now, when you click that button, it's going to open this little wizard right here, and it's going to give you a bunch of different settings that you could choose for your sequence. It gives you all of these different windows up here of things you could change, but you usually don't have to mess with these. Just stick to the wizard and follow the instructions on here. So your first option is you could pick either a musical sequence or an animation. If you pick an animation, there's no music to it, and you're just programming the lights to do whatever you want. They're not going to be synced to music. If you choose musical sequence, this gives you the option to add music to your sequence so you can sync the lights to the music. Most people, if you're making a musical light show or syncing the lights to the music, will use the musical sequence button. But if you want to make an animation with no music, then you can click this. We are going to make a musical sequence in this video. Once you click that, it's going to open your files. You're going to select any type of audio or video file. It does work with video files too. It will just take the audio from the video file though. So look through, find the song that you want to use. I'm going to use a copyright-free song. It's a remix version of Jingle Bells by Tokyo Machine. Once you click that, this next window is going to open and it wants you to choose the FPS of your sequence. FPS stands for frames per second, so how many different frames can you have in each second of the sequence? The options you have is 40, 20, or custom. I'm not going to get into all of the pros and cons of each option and which one you should choose. If you would like to know more in detail on how each one works and what they do differently, you can watch this video right here. But to go over it quickly, 20 frames per second, that means that we'll have 20 frames in a second, like it says, and that will allow you to change the lights up to 20 times in 1 second. So every 50 milliseconds, the lights can change. Whereas 40 frames per second, you could change the lights 40 times in a second, which is double the speed. The problem is going to 40 frames per second, your file size doubles. Nowadays, it's not that big of a deal because files aren't gigantic in xLights. For me personally, I always use 40 frames per second because I think it looks smoother and the effects look better, but that's because I've been sequencing for years, so I can notice the difference, and 20 frames per second really just bugs me because everything doesn't look as smooth. 40 frames per second will also make your computer take a little longer when it's trying to render the sequences, and there are some controllers that only work on 20 frames per second. Most standard controllers can do 40, but there are just a few out there that can only do 20. So if you don't care about how smooth everything looks, you just want to program something, pick 20. But for now, I'm going to pick 40 for this video. The other setting, custom, I would not recommend using this because controllers work better with either 20 or 40. Going in between or lower or higher than 40 frames per second could cause problems. I wouldn't recommend going above 40 frames per second, and I wouldn't recommend using custom at all. Just pick between 20 or 40. This final window here allows you to change some other settings, like what models show up in your model list when you're programming, either all or empty. If you have pre-saved model layouts, you could choose between here. We don't have any yet, but I'll show you how to make one in a little bit. You can also click more options here, which allows you to import data, or you could change any of these other settings right here, but you probably won't need that. So once you have either animation or musical chosen, and then your frame rate chosen, you can hit quick start, and it will open the sequence in here. So this is the main timeline right here, and this is your audio track right here. If you did not choose an audio track, it will be blank up here. You won't see any sound waves, and it will only be 30 seconds long. The default animation length is 30 seconds long, and I can show you how to change that in just a little bit. Down here are all of the different models that we have on the house right here. So we have the arches, the tree, the candy canes. These are the model groups right here with these little shapes next to them. This shows that it's a group, and these are all the single models. Right up here, these are all of your different effects you can choose from to program your sequence with. I believe there's a little over 50. They've been adding new ones every couple of months. So what you see now may be different in the future. There may be way more effects. They may have removed certain effects. And the overall way of how this works is you drag the effects into the row that your prop is on that you want it for. So if I want an effect on the candy canes, I'm going to drag the effect onto the row of the candy canes, and then you line it up in the column line. If you want to say, there is no specific lines, but you line it up with the audio track. So like if you wanted an effect to start here and end here, you could put it on here in the row of the model and then adjust the time with this. Now all of these different windows right here, these will allow you to change settings within the effect. You could change colors, you could change effect settings that come with it. You could change how it blends with other effects if you have multiple effects on one prop. We'll get into that later. Over here, you have these two windows. This is your house preview. So all of these windows are snappable, so you could pull them out. You could snap them in other places, wherever you want. And you can also make them full screen. This is the house preview, and anything you program will show up on here. So you can see what the effects will look like, and it almost makes it look like you're in person watching the show. That way you don't have to go and set up all of your lights, if you have them already, and run back and forth inside and out, trying to check to see how each effect looks. So these are the only windows I'm going to be showing right now. You can create a full sequence using just these few windows, and that's what I did for my first and part of my second year sequences. Now if you want to create more advanced sequences with certain effects and fades, you will have to open the other windows, but I'll go over those later. When you're in here, you could still move with your mouse around the house preview, so you can click the scroll wheel to move it side to side. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, and when you right click, you still have the option to switch to restore the default viewpoint. Now before we could get started programming, there is one last thing we should adjust. You don't have to do this, but you can rearrange the order that these models show up as if you'd like to. So there's two ways of opening the menu to sort these. One is you could click this button right here, the display elements button, or you can right click here and go through all these settings, and at the bottom is the edit display elements. So either of these open this window right here. Now, these are all of the models that you will see within the view. The view is whatever models are right here. This is the view that we have. You can make multiple views on here, and we can switch them right here if we wanted to. So if we wanted to, like, some of the elements to only show up on one view, then switch to the other view, we could do that. But I'm going to leave it on one view just to make it easy for now. Over here would be all of the models that are not on a view, and you could move them over here, but all the models are already on the view. This is kind of like when we did the groups, where you could click an element and then move it side to side. So we could click this left arrow to move it into the available elements. So I clicked the candy cane and I moved it over here, and now it is not on a view. So I could click the candy cane again and click the right arrow to move it back into the view. And then you could click and hold any of the elements to drag them wherever you want, or you could use the up and down arrows. The double up arrow, this will move whatever you click all the way to the top, and the double down arrow will do the same except going down. So I like to put the all models in the entire display, the main group, all the way at the top, and I keep all of my groups near the top. Next, I'll put all models on the house up here, all models on the house face can be below it, and then all models on fence can be right there. And then the most important models that I use, that I'll probably use frequently, I like to put at the top. I'm just going to sort this to how I like it. There, so I move these around to my liking, and if you wanted to create another view now, what you could do is come up here to the different views. This is the master view, so if we click this, this is what we'd see on the master view. We can click add and enter the name for the view, so we could call this one like view 2 if we wanted to. And then it creates view 2. If you click on it, there's no models in here, they're all on the available list. So we can move whatever we want onto view 2. If you hold down left click, you can select any of these that you want, and then we can move them all over if we wanted to. If we don't want this view, you can delete it, you can rename it, you can clone it, you can import a view, and you can make this the master view. I don't want any more views. I'm just going to leave the 1 right now. So I'm going to hit delete. And it'll ask, are you sure you want to delete it? Yes. And we have the 1 master view. And then we could close this, and now all of these elements have been moved around to how we like it. If you make a new model, let's say we made like a snowflake and we put it on the roof, and you come over here, it's not going to show up here. And if you're missing any models that you can't see and you don't know where they are, you can open the display elements, and then it will show on the unused models, and you can move them into a view. And with that other view I made called view 2, I would have been able to select it right here if I left it, but I didn't, so I'm just going to leave it on master view. So I'm going to get started right with adding some effects. Now before you add effects, you want to create a timing track. Right here where this says new timing, this is where your timing track will be kept. Basically, this is where you put marks on the grid right here to hold your effects within. Now you don't have to do this, and you could just drag effects onto the props you want and line them up. But that could be very hard, and you always want to add timing tracks because it just makes it really easy to line things up. So what you do is you could click anywhere on the audio track right here, and while you're clicking it, you can push space to listen to it or play it. And if we had effects here, the lights would be lighting up. I did just go and turn down the brightness of the house because it was pretty bright and you couldn't see the lights as well with it. But you could push space to play and stop the sequence. And you can also click with your mouse up here to make this little red mark come down, basically showing you which effects are going to be played with the audio. You can also hold left click and make this little box right here, and when you play this, it will only play that section. Now let's say right here I wanted to place a timing mark to start an effect because the music changes a little bit right here, and if we listen to it, I'm going to push space to play it. The music changes into this part. So right here, I want to make a mark where the effects will change from whatever's on this side going over here. So you click where you want that mark to be, and then you push the letter T on your keyboard. And now you'll notice this little white line is made, and if we move the red mark, this blue mark has been made there, and that's a permanent mark now. You can always move your thing around and play it, and that mark will stay there. And you can use this now to line up your effects perfectly with this mark so you know where you want it to change. You can also left click the mark and move it back and forth anywhere you want. You can right click it and it gives you some options like to lock and unlock it so you can make it so it's unmovable. You can copy and paste it and then you could delete it. So you can push delete and it got rid of that timing mark. Now if I want to put that timing mark back, I'm going to click here again, push T, and I'll move the little slider out of the way. And now the timing mark is here again. If you want to delete it, you can also click it and push the delete key on your keyboard. That also works. And if you want to undo anything, you can right click anywhere and you can click the undo button right here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a few timing marks where I think I want certain effects to change to a new effect. So right here, there is a change in the music. And then if we listen to the audio track, there's also a change right here. So if we come over here and listen to that, the music gets a little bit more upbeat right here. So I might want to add something or change an effect. So I'm going to click here again, and I'm going to push T again, and another timing mark has been made. Now you can also make timing marks while the song is playing. So while this red line is moving, if you push T, you can create timing marks. So I'm going to show you that. If I push T now, I made one, and I made another one there, and I made another one there. And you can keep pushing T as the song goes along to make whatever timing marks you want. Now, I don't want all these timing marks, so I'm going to delete them, and you could delete them one by one, or if you hold down the control key and click multiple timing marks, then right-click, you could delete multiple of them at a time. So we have these two sections right here where we could paste effects. And as you see, I can click within that grid area, and it like makes this blue line where I could select effects if there were any here. We can't really place effects out here because as you can see, it doesn't fill in a whole grid. That's because there's no timing marks any farther. So I'm going to start here with this section. And now I'm going to listen to the audio so I can think what effect I'd like to use. So I'm thinking some sort of sparkle. You can hear this little sparkle at the beginning. And I think it'd be cool if there's like a sparkle effect on certain items. So what you do now, once you know what effect you want to grab, there are many effects up here, like I've said. And when you're new to this, you're going to have no idea what all of them do. You might put some on, and they might just be black and not do anything. That's because you have to change some of the settings in them. If I was to go over what each effect does, I would be here for about another 3 hours. So if you'd like to learn what each effect does, then I recommend you check out this video where I go over all of the effects in xLights. So you could just watch as I use some of the basic, easy to use effects. Now there are multiple effects up here that can achieve a sparkle effect. But there is one called shimmer. And when you think of sparkle, shimmer also sounds like sparkle. So we could use this effect right here if we wanted to. If we click the effect, it opens the effect settings right here, but changing these will not do anything because it is not on a model yet. So now we need to determine which model or models do we want to put the shimmer effect on. And I'm thinking we should try it on the entire house group. One other thing I forgot to tell you quickly that I noticed I've been doing is I've been zooming in and out like this without telling you how I'm doing this. You can use the zoom in and out buttons up here, but there's also a shortcut. By holding control and scrolling, you can zoom in and out. So sorry I've been doing that and not telling you how I am, but that's how you can zoom in and out. But back to adding the shimmer effect, I think I'm going to put it on the all models in display and just see what it looks like. It would never hurt to try it. It's not permanent. Once you put an effect on there, you can always delete it and change it. So now what you do when you're ready to drag the effect onto here is you can either drag it from up here by clicking the little effect right here or clicking any of the effects up here. So I can grab the shimmer effect, I'm holding left click, and I could drag it to any of the elements in the light show. Or I could put it into the next timing segment and put it here, but we're starting here. And I'm going to place this on the all models in display. And now if we click the effect, it will show you what the effect is doing over here. But this effect is acting weird for some reason, and it's flashing between white and black, like now it's black, and then it was white, and it's not really doing what the effect sounds like it'd do. So we could go through and adjust some of the settings, and if we do, you can see it's doing some really weird stuff. And you can go and just change any of the sliders, click any of the buttons, fiddle around and figure out which each one does. If you don't want to take the time and learn it yourself, like I said, you can watch the video on what each effect does and what each button does. So I think the reason it's very violently flashing between white and red is because if you look up here, the colors white and red are selected. So with the effect clicked, so xLights knows we're editing this effect, we could change the colors. We can add more colors to it. So now blue is in this very rapid flashingness. And I'm actually going to stop this by putting it back down to 1, so it won't do that. Now for this opening shimmer, I think just doing white and having black and it would look good. We might need to select black, but I'm not sure yet. I'm going to adjust the settings and see what it will look like. So it looks like we did have to select black, and when we select use all colors, because if we didn't, it would just be white, and select this setting right here, pre 2017.7 shimmer, I think this means that this shimmer effect was updated after 2017, and you could select to use the old version. It looks like the old version works better. But there is a lot of lights in here, so let's see if we can reduce how many lights are in here. It doesn't really look like changing any of these sliders will reduce it. So I think we might have to find a new effect, because this effect doesn't work as I imagined it to. And this is what sequencing is all about. You're going to go through many different effects, and you're going to change them all out and find some other ones that will work better, because you're not going to instantly find the perfect effect and colors to begin with. So another effect I have in mind is the twinkle effect. That also makes you think of shimmer or sparkle when you think of those words. So I'm going to add that, and I picked that effect up and I dragged it on top of the old effect. When you do that, it will erase whatever is behind it. I could have also gone and right-clicked it and hit delete, and then grab the new twinkle effect and put it on top. You could do either of those. Now this effect, this looks like a really good effect. It has a nice little bit of twinkle, and I'm going to select just white for this. And let's see, percentage of light. So if I was new to this, I would assume that this setting probably means how many lights are in it. So if we up that, there's going to be more lights in it. Now the twinkle steps, I will tell you this is the speed, and it's a little confusing because the lower the number, the faster it goes. So let's decrease this and make it go a little bit faster. So that looks pretty good. So I'm going to zoom in to the timing track, and I'm going to play it now, and let's see how it looks. I'm going to click first frame, so we'll start at the beginning, and let's see how it will look. So that looked really cool with that sparkle as the music went on. We could go and change some more settings, but I'm going to leave it right now at this and move on to the next section. So now I'm going to listen to this next section and think of an effect that would look really good here. So an effect I think that would be really easy to add right here is the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is a really beautiful effect. I'm going to left click it and drag it onto all models and display. All of the effects I'm just going to use in all models and display for now. Now this effect instantly creates a rainbow wash, if you want to say, across the entire display since we have it in the entire display group. It makes it look really nice and beautiful. And there are some different settings on here. So the first one is like colors. We could change what colors we want. Right now it's set for rainbow, but if we set it to palette, it will use whatever colors are selected up here. So since we only have white selected, there's no other colors, so it's just all white. But if we add like Christmas colors, now it's white, red, and green. We could speed it up with this speed setting right here, and we can make it go normal direction, which is this way, or make it go reverse, which is that way. And there are some other settings you can mess with, but let's just see how this looks from the transition from the sparkle. It looks a little bit fast, so I'm going to slow it down a lot. Maybe like 20. So that looks really good, but I'm not going to go on any farther and sequence anything else. I'm going to show you the different settings and how you use these tools to make a sequence, but I'm not actually going to be making a sequence. There's a whole lot of different things you can do with layering, fades. You can change brightness and colors, color curves, value curves. That's all a whole bunch of sequencing stuff. So I'm going to continue showing you the different mechanics on how you create these sequences, but I'm not going to be attempting to create a masterpiece because it does take a little while to do that. But if you'd like to see how to make a sequence, I'm going to add another video up here. You can check out this video right here where I go over how I sequence. But let's continue on with the different things and settings there are that you can change in here. So I've gone over making the timing marks, and I've gone over how you place the effects on here. You could drag them onto the different spots you want. Another thing you could do is you can also left click and hold and move these effects side to side, but it won't let you move them up and down to different rows. It stays in this row. You could also left click an end of it and move it to make it longer or shorter of either side. And whenever you have an effect clicked, it will show you what that effect will look like over here. But let's say you want to move this effect down to the tree. The way you move it up and down is you use your up and down arrow keys on your keyboard. So if you click the down arrow, it will move it down to another model. And now it's on the all models on house group. So it moved it to that group of all of the things on the house. We can hit the down arrow again, and now it's on all of the models on the house face. Move it down again, and now it's on all the models on the fence. And if we move it down one more time, now it's showing up on the tree. You can go back up to and move it up and down, back and forth wherever you want it. We can move it all the way down to like the matrix if we wanted it on there. Move to the candy canes, the fence, whatever you want. Now if you were to right click any effect, there is a lot of different options that show up. You can cut it so you can get rid of it out of the sequence. You can copy it. You can't paste anything because we don't have anything copied yet. I'll show that in a second. You could delete it. You can split it, and if we click split, it splits the effect into two. So now there's two of these effects. And if we wanted to undo that, we can just go and right click anywhere and hit undo, or push Control Z for undo. We can duplicate the effect. We have undo and redo here, like I said. You can align it. So the way alignment would work is if you had multiple effects selected, you can select to align them both at a certain point. Effect presets. If you open this, it opens an effect preset menu where you can create, load, and export your own presets. You can save certain effects that you like on here. You can create random effects. So what this does is you can't have an effect selected, but if I was to select, let's say these two segments right here, and I was to highlight them over like this, if now we were to right click, you could click create random effects, and it will randomly generate effects to fit these two sections. Somehow it randomly generated the two same effects. These are fill effects. I talk a little bit more about creating random effects and trying to use them to make a sequence in that video I previously showed you. We can also reset the effect. So if we click this, it will reset all of the parameters in here to the default settings. You can add a description to the effect. So if you click it, you can enter any description you want. Like let's say this is the butterfly effect. And then if you want to read the description, you have to right click it and hit description, and they'll show you what it is. You can lock and unlock the effect like you can with models or the timing marks. So if I was to lock it, I can't move it. I can't accidentally touch it and move it. It's locked until I right click it and unlock it. You can enable and disable the render. And what that does is if you disable the render and then you go to render the entire sequence by clicking this render button, it will render all of the effects except this one because this one is disabled, and you can disable multiple effects. But if the render is not enabled on it, the effect might not work because xLights hasn't gotten the chance to render it. So you can re-enable render if you disable render. A time I find this useful is if I ever use a video on our projector screen, or if I'm going to use a video on our new panels that we have. Videos take a very long time to render in xLights. So if I'm just sequencing the song and I don't want to see the video, I don't care if it's there or not, I will right click it and disable the render. So when I render the rest of the sequence, it goes a lot faster. And finally, timing. If you click this, you can type in the milliseconds of where you want this effect to be. So this effect currently starts at 12,075 milliseconds. There's 1,000 milliseconds in a second. So this would mean that this is 12 seconds in, 12.075 seconds in from the start of the song. The duration, the effect lasts for 3.05 seconds, and it ends at 15.125 seconds. Now, if you're changing your colors up here, and let's put this on palette and select some colors. Let's say we have red and green, but you wanted to add another color. Let's say you wanted to add orange or purple. But wait, there is no orange or purple here. How are you going to do that? Well, there is this little drop down you can select, and there's a whole bunch of other color palettes in here that you could choose from. So, yay, now I get to use orange with the red and green. But wait, when I click that, it changes them all to different shades of orange. So how am I supposed to have multiple of those colors in there if it only does that? Well, if we go back to the default palette, you can click any one of these colors, and it opens this color option, and you could change that color. So it was blue, but let's say we want orange there, we could change that to be orange, and then select that color, and now we have red, green, and orange. If you wanted to flip the colors, so whatever's on this end is over here, and it just it flips the entire palette, which can be useful for some effects that do certain things based on which color is selected first. You can hit this little rotate button, and it will flip the palette. Now you'd have to uncheck these and go back and check the colors you wanted, but now, as you can see, the butterfly effect looks a little bit different because the orange is the first selected color. If you wanted to go back to the default palette though and get that blue back, you can click this right here and go back to the default palette right there. There are some other things you can do with the colors, like if you right click the color, it opens this value curve, or excuse me, color curve. But these are a little bit advanced, and I do have a video about them. I would link it up here, but I'm probably hitting my 5 limit amount of banner links, so I'll put this in the description along with all the other videos I've shared. Let's say though you make a palette that you like using all the time. Let's select the first 3 colors, and you make one that includes purple and orange, and what's another color not used? And we could put red right there because red is no longer there. You like using these colors quite frequently. You could save this palette so you don't have to change it every time by clicking this save button right here. And when you click it, it automatically saves it. And now if you look, you have your default palette right here. You can hover over it and it says the name default. But if we go to the top, there's this one PAL001, the first custom palette we made. We can now select it, and you can select the colors that are within it. If you want to delete the palette, you can choose the palette, make it open, and then click the X and it will delete it. If you scroll down in the color menu, and I'll make this a little bit bigger by, I just clicked the edge between the sequencer right here and the color menu, and I just dragged it. It gives you the little arrow so you can adjust all the windows. You have some other settings down here, like you can add sparkles into the effect by upping this. You could change the brightness, you could change contrast. There are some other things you can adjust. This checkbox right here, reset panel when changing effects. I recommend checking this. So anytime you use a new effect, it will reset the panel back to where it was with the default settings. That way you don't add, let's say, sparkles to this effect, then we add a new effect. The sparkles would still be on there because they are selected for this effect to be on. You can go up here and click this to have it automatically reset the panel. Now these settings, if I have no effects selected, are always available and I can always adjust them, but it's not going to affect any setting unless you click that setting. Excuse me, unless you click that effect. You have to have that effect clicked and then you could change the settings. You could tell if it's clicked by if it lights up purple. The next thing I'm going to go over is making layers on your different elements. You can have multiple layers within one of your props and have multiple effects on them doing different things. So let's say on the tree, we wanted there, let's find an effect. We wanted there to be this bars effect. If we zoom into the tree over here, or excuse me, spiral effect. It makes this spiral on the tree, and let's select one color. We want it to be purple, or maybe something a little brighter, orange. We adjust the movement speed, which is right here, so we speed it up a little bit. We adjust the number of times the palette is repeated in here, so we make this twice. It rotates around more, and we can decrease the thickness so there's more space behind it. As you can see, the sparkles from this effect is going down and also is on the tree at the same time, because since this is in the model group all models in display, it's going to obviously make the tree sparkle because the tree is a part of the group all models in display. But if we put an effect on the tree as well, that's going to layer on top of that other effect right here. And now the priority this is rendered in, or which one goes on top of the other one, it goes from top to bottom. So if you have this sparkle effect on top, it's going to render this one first, and then it's going to render an effect here if there was one, then here, and it's going to get to the bottom. And since this one is the last effect, it's the last one rendered, meaning it has the most priority and it will be on top. Now, if we were to go into the display elements, and let's put the tree on top of all models in display. Now, it's kind of hard to tell because it's hard to see the sparkles, but if I up the percentage of sparkles, you could see the sparkles are now taking priority and cover on top of the spiral because the sparkles are rendered last. Now if I put the tree back below it, and let's click the tree, move it back down here. I know it's a little hard to see, but now you can see the orange is going on top of the sparkles. There are no sparkles on top of the orange. The orange is on top of the sparkles. Now something to know about these layers is if you were to create another view and have, let's say the tree is on top or on bottom of that view. That way the tree is on top of everything since it's rendered last. But if in the master view, the tree is on the top, the tree will not be rendered last. It renders from top to bottom in your master view. This might all sound confusing, but I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. Just whatever is under the master view, the main view, whatever is at the bottom will always be rendered last. So whatever is on the bottom will always take priority since it's the last thing rendered on to your display. Now I'm going to delete this sparkles effect so I could show you some other different things with layers. So let's delete that. Let's say we wanted that sparkle effect to be behind the tree still because it was really cool, but we don't want it on the rest of the display. So how are we supposed to put multiple things on the tree when there's only one section for the tree right here? Well, if we right click the tree model in the model list, you can see there's a bunch of different settings here. If you click insert layer below or above, it will create a layer below or above that row. So now you can see there are two different rows that go into the tree. So if I was to move the spiral on the bottom, the spiral still works because they're both connected to the tree. But now we can add multiple effects. So we can put that twinkle effect back on here. Let's select white. We're going to go back to the default palette and check white. Now we can have the sparkles on the tree at the same time as the spirals, but it's not doing anything else. But now here is where it gets confusing. You'd think xLights would try and be nice and make everything simple by making it follow the same pattern. The bottom is rendered first. No, that's not the case. When you have multiple layers on one element, whatever is on top now takes priority. So if you look at this picture, this might help you make sense of this. Everything at the top is rendered first, and it goes down the line. If you have 10 elements here, like in the picture, it's going to render the top one first and the bottom one last. Since the bottom one is rendered last, that one is going to show up on top of everything else. But if you have multiple layers on one single model, when it gets time to render that model, it will render whatever is in the top of those layers first, disrupting the pattern of everything and making everything confusing, just like programming is. So it will take a lot of time to drill that into your memory so you can remember that it does that. You can add more layers if you wanted to add even more effects by hitting insert layer below again, or you can hit insert multiple layers and it can make multiple of them. If you want to delete a layer, you can right click it and you can hit delete layer, delete multiple layers, or delete unused layers. If you click this, it will automatically delete any layers that aren't being used. If we don't want this layer at all, we could just right click it, hit delete layer, it'll ask, and yes. Now when you right click on different models here, there are some other settings and buttons you can click here to do other things, but I'm not going to get into them now because you usually don't have to mess with these. Next, I'm going to go into the other windows and briefly show you some of the settings you might want to use in them. The two I'm going to go over is layer settings and layer blending, and we can open them by clicking them and it adds them into our little tabs up here. The other menus I did not go over are the effects. If you click this, it just makes a menu where all your effects are. You could just drag them from here, but now you can also drag them from here. I don't use this because I find it a waste of space. You can just use the effects that are already up there. The effects assistant, this is something you can use to map out what the effects will do. Now I'm going to go through the layer settings window first. There's two different tabs on here. There's this one called Roto-Zoom, and then there's the buffer. This window right here, you have to make sure you have an effect selected when you're changing the settings, otherwise it won't apply to anything. But the first thing up here is render style. This, to put it in simple terms, is telling xLights how you want this effect to be rendered onto the props. So when the effect is in a group, there are a ton of different options. But when the effect is on, let's just say, a singular model like the roof, there's only a few options. The default one just takes it as if it was a picture and puts that effect on there and just makes it run normally, if you want to say. Per preview will basically also make it look like it's on a picture, except the other ones, like when it was on default, if you were to look, the lines were moving in opposite directions, almost as if this single line was a straight line and it was just going down the line. Like imagine the line unfolding. That's because that's basically what a polyline is, and that's a polyline on the roof. If we set it to per preview, it will render it as default, but actually doing it as default and making it look like it's a picture based on how the preview looks. Most of the time, the models default and per preview will look exactly the same. Single line, that models it as if the effect is going down one singular line of the roof. So to make this simpler, I'm going to put this effect on the matrix. So we have default. It's making it look like a picture and does it the default way. We have per preview. It also does it the same way on the matrix. Single line though, that models it as if, so if we were to look at the wiring view, I think for this it zigzags back and forth this way, sort of. It's going to model it as if it was one long straight line and run the effect across the line. And then as pixel, that will render it as if this matrix acted as one whole pixel. So it might just stay one color depending on the effect, but if this matrix was one singular pixel, all of the lights together are one pixel, it will only change and show one color at a time because it's one pixel. Now when we had this on the roof, there was one other option, line segments. This will render it per individual line segment. So each individual line segment will be rendered on its own. But if we go back to a model group and we were to change the render style now, there's a whole bunch of different settings. The basic ones I'm going to go through are at the top. There's default, per preview, single line, and as pixel, like always. And then the other ones I'm going to talk about are some of these bottom ones. Default model as pixel, that will treat each individual model as its own pixel. So now if you look, each model is just one color. So this matrix, it's only one color. This window right here is only one color, the roof is only one color, and it's treating these as if they're individual pixels all grouped together. Per model default, what that does is this effect will get distributed onto each model and render it as the model by itself, not as one whole group. When it's on default, it's one whole group. So if you would imagine the picture going on it, the picture goes across the entire display. But when it's on per model default, it is rendering it so the picture is going across each model individually. And then you can have each individual model per preview, each individual model as a single line, and those are probably the only ones you'll have to worry about. The buffer, I'll go over this quickly. Basically, you could select which section of that model or group is lighting up. So if I was to put this in half and only select this half of the buffer, only this half of the display is going to get that effect. And I can move this around, so like only this section of it will get it. Down here I can make it have it. You could right click and have some defaults pop up, like left half, you only want the left half on, thirds, all of that. Over here I'm not even going to make an example with this. I'll just tell you what it does. You could change these settings to make the effect rotate. You can make the effect zoomed in. Like if it was a picture, you could zoom into it. But you don't really need all of this. This is to make really advanced sequences. And if all of this made absolutely no sense, that is perfectly fine. You don't need to use layer settings to make a sequence. Maybe sometime in the future, I might go in deeper on each individual setting, but I don't want to make this video 24 hours long. The final window, layer blending, there are two different sections in here you might use. The top checkbox, this is reset panel when changing effects. It's just like the color one, how every time you change an effect, it will reset the panel. Everything from this canvas button and up, don't worry about it. It's basically how effects that are overlapping each other blend with each other. The only ones I want to talk about are the in transition and the out transition. Basically, for the beginning of the effect, let's say we have the butterfly effect right here. You could select for there to be a transition as it comes in and out. If you want the effect to fade in, you have your transition. These are a bunch of different transitions. You could try them out yourself, but I'd recommend starting with fade because it's the simplest to use. And then you could select how long you want that fade to last in. So I can make it fade in for 2 seconds. And now if you see this little green line, this shows you the time that it takes to fade in. So if we were to play this, the butterfly effect fades in. You can make it really long, or you can make it short and do like half a second. And now watch it fade in. In the out transition is the exact same thing, except on the right half, the outside of the model. We can make it fade out for like a minute and a half, a minute and a half. We could make it fade out for a second and a half if we wanted to. And then it will do this. And if we move the effect, the out transition will still be at the end for however long you have it. And there are some other ones you could do, like instead of having it fade, you could have it explode with a circle, you could have it shatter, you could have it a pinwheel, you could have a doorway. And certain transitions will give you the option, this adjustment setting. You might need this to adjust how it works, and you can reverse certain ones. You still don't even have to use in or out transitions. If you are looking for something a little bit more advanced though to make your sequences look cooler, you could add in and out transitions to them. Now before I finish up, I did just realize that there's two things I forgot to talk about. I forgot to talk about the sequence setting button up here and what that does, and about how you can add more timing tracks. So I'm going to start with the sequence setting button and all of these settings right here and what they do. So these are your overall sequence settings, like the music and the length of it and all of the details about it. These are also some of the settings you saw when you use the wizard to make a sequence. This is the main page right here though, where it shows the version of xLights, how many models are in it, the file names. You could change the sequence type even after you've programmed it to an animation or media if you want to. And right here is where you change the song. I have mine under my light show folder under music. You can also download the sequence and lyrics. You could see the sequence duration right here. And then the sequence timing, this is the FPS where you could change that. If you hit this little question mark, it will ask you, are you sure modifying the timing interval can cause problems? If you were using 40 frames per second and you go down to 20, it might move some effects by a few milliseconds since you lost half the timing. But if you move up from 20 to 40, there won't be that many problems. So if you click yes, you can adjust the timing interval by the milliseconds. 25 milliseconds is 40 frames per second right there. It will show you. And if we went up to 50, that would be 20 frames per second. If you went lower, like 10, that'd be 100 frames per second. But I don't recommend going lower than 25. And then if you had an animation loaded with no song, the default duration of it is 30 seconds. And you could change that right here if you wanted the animation to be longer or shorter. You would go into the sequence settings, go to the sequence duration, and change the length of it. And if you ever need to change your song for any reason or switch it to media or animation, you can click this little button and it will give you the option to select your song. The other settings over here, there's nothing that important that you'll really have to mess with. It's only on the Info Media tab. And once you're done and you hit done, it's going to automatically render your sequence to apply all the changes. So that's the sequence settings, and here's an older video I recorded a few days ago of the timing tracks and different settings and things you can do with those. You can add multiple of these timing tracks if you wanted to, so all of your timing marks don't have to show up on this one first timing track. To add a new one, you have to right click the timing track up here, and then you can hit add timing track, and then it will ask you to add a timing interval. So you can have it automatically detect certain beats or go by placing timing marks every 100 milliseconds, 50 milliseconds, whatever, or leave it empty and there'll be no timing marks on it yet. So I usually leave it as empty, and then you could give it a name. So I can name it timing track 2. And now there's this other timing track. So if I was to play the sequence, I could place timing marks on the red timing track now. So now it is red and I'm placing these red timing marks. But if I click up here and go back to the new timing by tapping the little bubble right here, now I'm back on the blue timing marks. This is a good way where if you have a lot of beats that you need to place multiple timing marks for, but you don't want them interfering with the main timing marks, it's a simple way to do that. You can also right click either of these and you can rename it, you can delete it, you can import and export timing tracks. And there are some other things down here like import lyrics and stuff, but that's all for other videos with more advanced things you can do with xLights. But that is the entire sequencer tab. That's all the different settings in it. And since I didn't want to make a sequence and make this a very, very long video, I will go and show you this exact same song that I've already programmed for my show and show you just briefly how I program that. But first, anytime you go to close a sequence and you're done with it, I'd recommend rendering it. That way, when you open it, it will be working correctly. All of the different elements will be rendered already. So you can click that, and it shows you this little render bar at the bottom and how long it'll take. It just did that in like half a second because it was only this one single effect. And then once you're done, you can hit save. You can add a name to it. You do want to keep this .xsq extension on the end because this is the extension to open it so we can name it whatever we want. It will automatically generate to the song name if you picked a song, but I would just call this test. So here's a sequence that took me about a couple of weeks to make on my display. This is my display right here. And as you can see, there's a lot of effects to it. There's a lot of timing marks, lots of layers, and I would call this a pretty good sequence. I think I did above average good on it. Definitely not one of the best sequences I've done, but it is a pretty good one, I'd say. As you can see, lots of effects are being used at once. So if we take a look at this one row right here, we have an entire display group up here, and there's 4 different layers in it, and it starts off with 2 of these snowflake patterns. One is blue and one is white. It's kind of hard to see the blue one, but there is a blue one there. And then on the candy canes, we have an off effect, and the reason that's here is so this entire display effect does not go on to the candy canes. And then we have the arches doing something right here. And then the floodlights at the same time are going on this color wash effect, changing colors. And then down here, I have a shockwave effect, which goes in line with like the beat for the candy canes. So if you were to listen to that, you could see the candy canes move with the song. And the layer blending and layer setting panels, those were used a ton in this sequence. Definitely with the in and out transitions, they were used a lot. But there's just lots and lots of different effects and patterns and settings I had to use on this. So like I said earlier, if you would like to see how I make a sequence, how I program all this, and dive deeper into this sequence specifically, how I came up with each effect, then I recommend watching that video I shared earlier. I will put it in the description. And with that, that concludes the xLights tutorial. If your head isn't exploding with knowledge, then you have a problem. Congratulations, you made it through the full 2.5 hour long xLights tutorial. You should be ready now to install xLights, set up your layout, and make your first sequence. My only 2 goals with this video were 1, update the last full xLights tutorial because it sucked, my mic quality was terrible, I forgot to talk about a lot of things, and my second goal was to hopefully reach new people that haven't heard about xLights and are looking for a tutorial, if you were to scroll through and see one from 2 or 3 years ago, you might think it's outdated and not watch it. So hopefully this new one was able to help you get started using xLights and feel comfortable making a sequence. If you have any questions, comments, or think I missed out on anything, any future video ideas, anything you want to let me know about, please feel free to put them down in the comment section below. If I don't reply instantly, I'm probably working on something, but I will eventually reply. But thank you for watching and supporting the videos, and like always, I'll see you in the next video.